This reading by Annie Coleman in St. Louis, Missouri, in April 2006. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. Chapter 31. We dasn't stop again at any town for days and days, kept right along down the river. We was down south in the warm weather now, and a mighty long ways from home. We begun to come to trees with Spanish moss on them, hanging down from the limbs like long gray beards. It was the first I ever see it growing, and it made the woods look solemn and dismal. So now the frauds reckoned they was out of danger, and they begun to work the villages again. First, they done a lecture on temperance, but they didn't make enough for them both to get drunk on. Then in another village they started a dancing school, but they didn't know no more how to dance than a kangaroo does. So the first prance they made, the general public jumped in and pranced them out of town. Another time they tried to go at yellocution, but they didn't yellocute long, till the audience got up and give them a solid good cussin' and made them skip out. They tackled missionarying and mesmerizing and doctoring and telling fortunes and a little of everything, but they couldn't seem to have no luck. So at last they got just about dead broke, and laid around the raft as she floated along, thinking and thinking, and never saying nothing, by the half a day at a time, and dreadful blue and desperate. And at last they took a change and begun to lay their heads together in the wigwam, and talk low and confidential, 2 or 3 hours at a time. Jim and me got uneasy. We didn't like the look of it. We judged they was studying up some kind of worse deviltry than ever. We turned it over and over, and at last we made up our minds they was going to break into somebody's house or store, or was going into the counterfeit money business or something. So then we was pretty scared, and made up an agreement that we wouldn't have nothing in the world to do with such actions, and if we ever got the least show we would give them the cold shake and clear out and leave them behind. Well, early one morning we hid the raft in a good, safe place about 2 miles below a little bit of a shabby village named Pikesville, and the king, he went ashore and told us all to stay hid, whilst he went up to town and smelt around to see if anybody had got any wind of the Royal Nonesuch there yet. "House to rob, you mean," says I to myself, "and when you get through robbing it you'll come back here and wonder what has become of me and Jim in the raft, and you'll have to take it out in wondering." And he said if he warn't back by midday, the Duke and me would know it was all right, and we was to come along. So we stayed where we was. The Duke, he fretted and sweated around and was in a mighty sour way. He scolded us for everything, and we couldn't seem to do nothing right. He found fault with every little thing. Something was a-brewin', sure. I was good and glad when midday came and no king. We could have a change, anyway, and maybe a chance for the chance on top of it. So me and the Duke went up to the village and hunted around there for the king, and by we found him in the back room of a little low doggery, very tight, and a lot of loafers bully-ragging him for sport, and he a-cussin' and a-threatenin' with all his might, and so tight he couldn't walk, and couldn't do nothing to them. The Duke, he begun to abuse him for an old fool, and the king begun to sass back, and the minute they was fairly at it, I lit out and shook the reefs out of my hind legs, and spun down the river road like a deer, for I see our chance, and I made up my mind that it would be a long day before they ever see me and Jim again. I got down there all out of breath, but loaded up with joy, and sung out, "Set her loose, Jim, we're all right now." But there warn't no answer, and nobody come out of the wigwam. Jim was gone. I set up a shout, and then another one, and run this way and that in the woods, whooping and screeching, but it warn't no use. Old Jim was gone. Then I set down and cried. I couldn't help it. But I couldn't set still long. Pretty soon I went out on the road trying to think what I better do, and I run across a boy walking, and asked him if he'd seen a strange nigger dressed so-and-so, and he says, "Yes." "Whereabouts?" says I. "Down to Silas Phelps's place, 2 mile below here. He's a runaway nigger, and they've got him. Was you looking for him?" "You bet I ain't. I run across him in the woods about an hour or 2 ago, and he said if I hollered he'd cut my livers out, and told me to lay down and stay where I was, and I done it. Been there ever since, afeard to come out." "Well," he says, "you needn't be afeard no more, because they've got him. He run off from down south somewheres. It's a good job they got him. Well, I reckon. There's $200 reward on him. It's like picking up money out in the road." "Yes, it is, and I could 'a' had it if I'd been big enough. I see him first. Who nailed him?" "It was an old fellow, a stranger, and he sold out his chance in him for $40, because he's got to go up the river and can't wait. Think o' that, now! You bet I'd wait, if it was 7 year." "That's me every time," says I, "but maybe his chance ain't worth no more than that, if he'll sell it so cheap. Maybe there's something ain't straight about it." "But it is, though, straight as a string. I see the handbill myself. It tells all about him, to a dot, paints him like a picture, and tells the plantation he's from, below New Orleans. No siree, Bob, they ain't no trouble about that speculation, you bet you. Say, gimme a chaw of tobacco, won't ye?" I didn't have none, so he left. I went to the raft and set down in the wigwam to think, but I couldn't come up to nothing. I thought till I wore my head sore, but I couldn't see no way out of the trouble. After all this long journey, and after all we done for them scoundrels, here it was all come to nothing, everything all busted up and ruined, because they could have the heart to serve Jim such a trick as that, and make him a slave again all his life, and among strangers, too, for $40 dirty dollars. Once I said to myself it would be 1,000 times better for Jim to be a slave at home where his family was, as long as he'd got to be a slave, and so I'd better write a letter to Tom Sawyer and tell him to tell Miss Watson where he was. But I soon give up that notion for 2 things. She'd be mad and disgusted at his rascality and ungratefulness for leaving her, and so she'd sell him straight down the river again. And if she didn't, everybody naturally despises an ungrateful nigger, and they'd make Jim feel it all the time, and so he'd feel ornery and disgraced. And then think of me! It would get all around that Huck Finn helped a nigger to get his freedom, and if I was ever to see anybody from that town again, I'd be ready to get down and lick his boots for shame. That's just the way. A person does a low-down thing, and then he don't want to take no consequences of it. Thinks as long as he can hide it, it ain't no disgrace. That was my fix exactly. The more I studied about this, the more my conscience went to grinding me, and the more wicked and low-down and ornery I got to feeling. And at last, when it hit me all of a sudden that here was the plain hand of Providence slapping me in the face and letting me know my wickedness was being watched all the time from up there in heaven, whilst I was stealing a poor old woman's nigger that hadn't ever done me no harm, and now was showing me there's one that's always on the lookout and ain't a-going to allow no such miserable doings to go only just so fur and no further, I most dropped in my tracks, I was so scared. Well, I tried the best I could to kinder soften it up somehow for myself by saying I was brung up wicked, and so I weren't so much to blame. But something inside of me kept saying, there was the Sunday school, you could 'a' gone to it, and if you'd 'a' done it, they'd 'a' learnt you there that people that acts as I've been acting about that nigger goes to everlasting fire. It made me shiver, and I about made up my mind to pray and see if I couldn't try to quit being the kind of a boy I was and be better. So I kneeled down, but the words wouldn't come. Why wouldn't they? It warn't no use to try and hide it from him, nor from me, neither. I knowed very well why they wouldn't come. It was because my heart warn't right, and it was because I warn't square. It was because I was playing double. I was letting on to give up sin, but away inside of me I was holding on to the biggest one of all. I was trying to make my mouth say I would do the right thing and the clean thing, and go and write to that nigger's owner and tell where he was, but deep down in me I knowed it was a lie, and he knowed it. You can't pray a lie. I found that out. So I was full of trouble, full as I could be, and didn't know what to do. At last I had an idea, and I says, I'll go and write the letter, and then see if I can pray. Why, it was astonishing the way I felt as light as a feather right straight off, and my troubles all gone. So I got a piece of paper and a pencil, all glad and excited, and set down and wrote, Miss Watson, your runaway nigger Jim is down here, 2 miles below Pikesville, and Mr. Phelps has got him, and he will give him up for the reward if you send. Huck Finn. I felt good and all washed clean of sin for the first time I had ever felt so in my life, and I knowed I could pray now. But I didn't do it straight off, but laid the paper down and set there thinking how good it was all this happened so, and how near I come to being lost and going to hell, and went on thinking, and got to thinking over our trip down the river, and I see Jim before me all the time, in the day and in the night time, sometimes moonlight, sometimes storms, and we a-floating along, talking and singing and laughing. But somehow I couldn't seem to strike no places to harden me against him, but only the other kind. I'd see him standing my watch on top of his'n, instead of calling me, so I could go on sleeping, and see him how glad he was when I come back out of the fog, and when I come home to him again in the swamp, up there where the feud was, and such like times, and would always call me honey and pet me and do everything he could think of for me, and how good he always was. And at last I struck the time I saved him by telling the men we had smallpox aboard, and he was so grateful and said I was the best friend old Jim ever had in the world, and the only one he's got now. And then I happened to look around and see that paper. It was a close place. I took it up and held it in my hand. I was a-trembling, because I'd got to decide forever betwixt 2 things, and I knowed it. I studied a minute, sort o' holding my breath, and then says to myself, All right then, I'll go to hell, and tore it up. It was awful thoughts and awful words, but they was said, and I let them stay said, and never thought no more about reforming. I shoved the whole thing out of my head, and said I would take up wickedness again, which was in my line, being brung up to it, and the other warn't. And for a starter, I would go to work and steal Jim out of slavery again, and if I could think up anything worse, I would do that too, because as long as I was in and in for good, I might as well go the whole hog. Then I set to thinking over how to get at it, and turned over some considerable many ways in my mind, and at last fixed up a plan that suited me. So then I took the bearings of a woody island that was down the river a piece, and as soon as it was fairly dark, I crept out with my raft and went for it, and hid it there, and then turned in. I slept the night through and got up before it was light, and had my breakfast and put on my store clothes, and tied up some others and one thing or another in a bundle, and took the canoe and cleared for shore. I landed below where I judged was Phelps's place, and hid my bundle in the woods, and then filled up the canoe with water, and loaded rocks into her and sunk her where I could find her again when I wanted her, about 1/4 of a mile below a little steam sawmill that was on the bank. Then I struck up the road, and when I passed the mill, I see a sign on it, Phelps Sawmill, and when I come to the farmhouses, 200 or 300 yards further along, I kept my eyes peeled, but didn't see nobody around, though it was good daylight now. But I didn't mind, because I didn't want to see nobody just yet. I only wanted to get the lay of the land. According to my plan, I was going to turn up there from the village, not from below. So I just took a look and shoved along, straight for town. Well, the first man I see when I got there was the Duke. He was sticking up a bill for the Royal Nonesuch, 3-night performance like that other time. They had the cheek, them frauds. I was right on him before I could shirk. He looked astonished and says, "Hullo, where'd you come from?" Then he says kind of glad and eager, "Where's the raft? Got her in a good place?" I says, "Why, that's just what I was going to ask your grace." Then he didn't look so joyful and says, "What was your idea for asking me?" he says. "Well," I says, "when I see the king in that doggery yesterday, I says to myself, we can't get him home for hours till he's soberer, so I went a-loafing around town to put in the time and wait. A man up and offered me 10 cents to help him pull a skiff over the river and back to fetch a sheep, and so I went along. But when we was dragging him to the boat, and the man left me a holt of the rope and went behind him to shove him along, he was too strong for me and jerked loose and run, and we after him. We didn't have no dog, and so we had to chase him all over the country till we tired him out. We never got him till dark. Then we fetched him over, and I started down for the raft. When I got there, and I see it was gone, I says to myself, they've got into trouble and had to leave, and they've took my nigger, which is the only nigger I've got in the world, and now I'm in a strange country, and ain't got no property no more, nor nothing, and no way to make my living. So I set down and cried. I slept in the woods all night. But what did become of the raft then? And Jim, poor Jim. Blamed if I know, that is, what's become of the raft. That old fool had made a trade and got $40, and when we found him in the doggery, the loafers had matched $half with him and got every cent but what he'd spent for whiskey. And when I got him home late last night and found the raft gone, we said, that little rascal has stole our raft and shook us and run off down the river. I wouldn't shake my nigger, would I? The only nigger I had in the world and the only property? We never thought of that. Fact is, I reckon we'd come to consider him our nigger. Yes, we did consider him so. Goodness knows we had trouble enough for him. So when we see the raft was gone, and we flat broke, there warn't anything for it but to try the Royal Nonesuch another shake, and I've pegged along ever since, dry as a powder horn. Where's that 10 cents? Give it here. I had considerable money, so I give him 10 cents, but begged him to spend it for something to eat and give me some, because it was all the money I had, and I hadn't had nothing to eat since yesterday. He never said nothing. The next minute he whirls on me and says, "Do you reckon that nigger will blow on us? We'd skin him if he done that." "How can he blow? Hain't he run off?" "No, that old fool sold him, and never divided with me, and the money's gone." "Sold him?" I says, and begun to cry. "Why, he was my nigger, and that was my money. Where is he? I want my nigger." "Well, you can't get your nigger, that's all, so dry up your blubberin'. Looky here, do you think you'd venture to blow on us? Blamed if I think I'd trust you. Why, if you was to blow on us—" He stopped, but I never see the Duke look so ugly out of his eyes before. I went on a-whimperin' and says, "I don't want to blow on nobody, and I ain't got no time to blow nohow. I got to turn out and find my nigger." He looked kinder bothered, and stood there with his bills flutterin' on his arm, thinkin', and wrinklin' up his forehead. At last he says, "I'll tell you something. We got to be here 3 days. If you'll promise you won't blow, and won't let the nigger blow, I'll tell you where to find him." So I promised, and he says, "A farmer by the name of Silas and then he stopped. You see, he started to tell me the truth, but when he stopped that way and begun to study and think again, I reckoned he was changing his mind. And so he was. He wouldn't trust me. He wanted to make sure of having me out of the way the whole 3 days. So pretty soon he says, 'The man that bought him is named Abram Foster, Abram G. Foster, and he lives 40 mile back here in the country, on the road to Lafayette.' 'All right,' I says. 'I can walk it in 3 days, and I'll start this very afternoon.' 'No, you won't. You'll start now. And don't you lose any time about it neither, nor do any gabbling by the way. Just keep a tight tongue in your head and move right along, and then you won't get into trouble with us, do you hear?' That was the order I wanted, and that was the one I played for. I wanted to be left free to work my plans. 'So clear out,' he says, 'and you can tell Mr. Foster whatever you want to. Maybe you can get him to believe that Jim is your nigger. Some idiots don't require documents. Leastways, I've heard there's such down south here. And when you tell him the handbill and the reward's bogus, maybe he'll believe you when you explain to him what the idea was for getting 'em out. Go 'long now, and tell him anything you want to, but mind you don't work your jaw any between here and there.' So I left and struck for the back country. I didn't look around, but I kinder felt like he was watching me. But I knowed I could tire him out at that. I went straight out in the country as much as a mile before I stopped. Then I doubled back through the woods towards Phelps's. I reckoned I better start in on my plan straight off without fooling around, because I wanted to stop Jim's mouth till these fellows could get away. I didn't want no trouble with their kind. I'd seen all I wanted to of them, and wanted to get entirely shut of them. End of chapter 31. Chapter 32. When I got there it was all still and Sunday-like, and hot and sunshiny. The hands was gone to the fields, and there was them kind of faint dronin's of bugs and flies in the air that makes it seem so lonesome and like everybody's dead and gone. And if a breeze fans along and quivers the leaves, it makes you feel mournful, because you feel like it's spirits whisperin', spirits that's been dead ever so many years, and you always think they're talking about you. As a general thing, it makes a body wish he was dead too, and done with it all. Phelps's was one of these little one-horse cotton plantations, and they all look alike. A rail fence round a 2-acre yard, a stile made out of logs sawed off and upended in steps, like barrels of a different length, to climb over the fence with, and for the women to stand on when they are going to jump onto a horse. Some sickly grass patches in the big yard, but mostly it was bare and smooth, like an old hat with the nub rubbed off. Big double-log house for the white folks, hewed logs, with the chinks stopped up with mud or mortar, and these mud-straps been whitewashed some time or another. Round log kitchen with a big, broad, open but roofed passage joining it to the house, log smokehouse back of the kitchen, 3 little log nigger cabins in a row the other side of the smokehouse, 1 little hut all by itself away down against the back fence, and some outbuildings down a piece the other side, ash hopper and big kettle to bile soap in by the little hut, bench by the kitchen door with bucket of water and a gourd. Hound asleep there in the sun, more hounds asleep round about 3 shade trees away off in a corner, some currant bushes and gooseberry bushes in one place by the fence. Outside of the fence, a garden and a watermelon patch. Then the cotton fields begins, and after the fields, the woods. I went around and clumb over the back stile by the ash hopper and started for the kitchen. When I got a little ways, I heard the dim hum of a spinning wheel wailin' along up and sinking along down again, and then I knowed for certain I wished I was dead, for that is the lonesomest sound in the whole world. I went right along, not fixin' up any particular plan, but just trustin' to Providence to put the right words in my mouth when the time come, for I'd noticed that Providence always did put the right words in my mouth if I left it alone. When I got halfway, first one hound and then another got up and went for me, and of course I stopped and faced them and kept still, and such another powwow as they made! In a quarter of a minute I was a kind of a hub of a wheel, as you may say, spokes made out of dogs. Circle of 15 of them packed together around me, with their necks and noses stretched up towards me, a-barkin' and howlin', and more a-comin'. You could see them sailin' over fences and around corners from everywheres. A nigger woman come tearin' out of the kitchen with a rollin' pin in her hand, singin' out, "Begone, you Tige! You Spot! Begone, sah!" And she fetched first one and then another of them with a clip and sent them howlin', and then the rest followed, and the next second half of them come back, waggin' their tails around me and making friends with me. There ain't no harm in a hound, nohow. And behind the woman comes a little nigger girl and 2 little nigger boys without anything on but tow linen shirts, and they hung on to their mother's gown and peeped out from behind her at me, bashful, the way they always do. And here comes the white woman, running from the house, about 45 or 50-year-old, bareheaded, and her spinning stick in her hand, and behind her comes her little white children, acting the same way the little niggers was going. She was smiling all over so she could hardly stand, and says, "It's you, at last, ain't it?" I out with a "Yes'm" before I thought. She grabbed me and hugged me tight, and then gripped me by both hands and shook, and the tears come in her eyes and run down over, and she couldn't seem to hug and shake enough, and kept saying, "You don't look as much like your mother as I reckoned you would, but law sakes, I don't care for that. I'm so glad to see you. Dear, dear, it does seem like I could eat you up. Children, it's your cousin Tom. Tell him howdy." But they ducked their heads and put their fingers in their mouths and hid behind her. So she run on, "Lize, hurry up and get him a hot breakfast right away. Or did you get your breakfast on the boat?" I said I had got it on the boat, so then she started for the house, leading me by the hand, and the children tagging after. When we got there, she set me down in a split-bottom chair, and set herself down on a little low stool in front of me, holding both of my hands, and says, "Now I can have a good look at you, and laws o' me, I've been hungry for it a many and a many a time, all these long years, and it's come at last. We've been expecting you a couple of days and more. What kep' you? Boat get aground?" "Yes'm, she—" "Don't say yes'm, say Aunt Sally. Where'd she get aground?" I didn't rightly know what to say, because I didn't know whether the boat would be coming up the river or down. But I go a good deal on instinct, and my instinct said she would be coming up, from down towards Orleans. That didn't help me much, though, for I didn't know the names of bars down that way. I see I'd got to invent a bar, or forget the name of the one we got aground on, or— Now I struck an idea and fetched it out. It warn't the groundin'. That didn't keep us back but a little. We blowed out a cylinder head. "Good gracious! Anybody hurt?" "No'm, killed a nigger." "Well, it's lucky, because sometimes people do get hurt. 2 years ago last Christmas your Uncle Silas was coming up from New Orleans on the Lally Rook, and she blowed out a cylinder head and crippled a man, and I think he died afterwards. He was a Baptist. Your Uncle Silas knowed a family in Baton Rouge that knowed his people very well. Yes, I remember now, he did die. Mortification set in, and they had to amputate him, but it didn't save him. Yes, it was mortification, that was it. He turned blue all over and died in the hope of a glorious resurrection. They say he was a sight to look at. Your uncle's been up to the town every day to fetch you, and he's gone again not more'n an hour ago. He'll be back any minute now. You must have met him on the road, didn't you? Oldish man with a—" "No, I didn't see nobody, Aunt Sally. The boat landed just at daylight, and I left my baggage on the wharf boat and went looking around the town and out a piece in the country to put in the time and not get here too soon, and so I come down the back way." "Who'd you give the baggage to?" "Nobody." "Why, child, it'll be stole." "Not where I hidden, I reckon it won't," I says. "How'd you get your breakfast so early on the boat?" It was kinder thin ice, but I says, "The captain seen me standing around and told me I better have something to eat before I went ashore, so he took me in the Texas to the officers' lunch and give me all I wanted." I was getting so uneasy I couldn't listen good. I had my mind on the children all the time. I wanted to get them out to one side and pump them a little and find out who I was, but I couldn't get no show. Mrs. Phelps kept it up and run on so. Pretty soon she made the cold chill streak all down my back, because she says, "But here we're a-running on this way, and you hain't told me a word about Sis, nor any of them. Now I'll rest my works a little, and you start up yourn. Just tell me everything. Tell me all about 'em all, every one of 'em, and how they are, and what they're doing, and what they told you to tell me, and every last thing you can think of." Well, I see I was up a stump, and up it good. Providence had stood by me this fur all right, but I was hard and tight aground now. I see it warn't a bit of use to try to go ahead. I'd got to throw up my hand. So I says to myself, here's another place where I got to risk the truth. I opened my mouth to begin, but she grabbed me and hustled me in behind the bed and says, "Here he comes. Stick your head down lower there. That'll do. You can't be seen now. Don't you let on you're here. I'll play a joke on him. Children, don't you say a word." I see I was in a fix now, but it warn't no use to worry. There warn't nothing to do but just hold still and try to be ready to stand from under when the lightning struck. I had just one little glimpse of the old gentleman when he come in, then the bed hid him. Mrs. Phelps, she jumps for him and says, "Has he come?" "No," says her husband. "Goodness gracious," she says, "what in the world can have become of him?" "I can't imagine," says the old gentleman, "and I must say it makes me dreadful uneasy." "Uneasy?" she says. "I'm ready to go distracted. He must have come, and you've missed him along the road. I know it's so. Something tells me so." "Why, Sally, I couldn't miss him along the road. You know that." "But, oh dear, dear, what will Sis say? He must have come. You must have missed him. He—" "Oh, don't distress me any more'n I'm already distressed. I don't know what in the world to make of it. I'm at my wits' end, and I don't mind acknowledging that I'm right down scared. But there's no hope that he's come, for he couldn't come and me miss him. Sally, it's terrible, just terrible. Something's happened to the boat, sure." "Why, Silas, look yonder up the road. Ain't that somebody coming?" He sprung to the window at the head of the bed, and that give Mrs. Phelps the chance she wanted. She stooped down quick at the foot of the bed and give me a pull, and out I come, and when he turned back from the window there she stood, a-beaming and a-smiling like a house afire, and I standing pretty meek and sweaty alongside. The old gentleman stared and says, "Why, who's that?" "Who do you reckon it is?" "I hain't no idea. Who is it?" "It's Tom Sawyer." By jings, I most slumped through the floor. But there weren't no time to swap knives. The old man grabbed me by the hand and shook and kept on shaking. And all the time, how the woman did dance around and laugh and cry. And then how they both did fire off questions about Sid and Mary and the rest of the tribe. But if they was joyful, it warn't nothing to what I was, for it was like being born again, I was so glad to find out who I was. Well, they froze to me for 2 hours, and at last, when my chin was so tired it couldn't hardly go any more, I had told them more about my family, the Sawyer family, than ever happened to any 6 Sawyer families. And I explained all about how we blowed out a cylinder head at the mouth of White River, and it took us 3 days to fix it, which was all right and worked first rate, because they didn't know but what it would take 3 days to fix it. If I'd 'a called it a bolt head, it would 'a done just as well. Now, I was feeling pretty comfortable all down one side, and pretty uncomfortable all up the other. Being Tom Sawyer was easy and comfortable, and it stayed easy and comfortable, till by and by I hear a steamboat coughing along down the river. Then I says to myself, s'pose Tom Sawyer comes down on that boat, and s'pose he steps in here any minute and sings out my name before I can throw him a wink to keep quiet. Well, I couldn't have it that way. It wouldn't do at all. I must go up the road and waylay him. So I told the folks I reckoned I would go up to the town and fetch down my baggage. The old gentleman was for going along with me, but I said no, I could drive the horse myself, and I'd druther he wouldn't take no trouble about me. End of chapter 32. Chapter 33. So I started for town in the wagon, and when I was halfway, I see a wagon comin', and sure enough, it was Tom Sawyer, and I stopped and waited till he come along. I says, "Hold on," and it stopped alongside, and his mouth opened up like a trunk, and stayed so, and he swallowed 2 or 3 times like a person that's got a dry throat, and then says, "I hain't ever done you no harm, you know that. So, then, what you want to come back and haunt me for?" I says, "I hain't come back. I hain't been gone." When he heard my voice, it righted him up some, but he warn't quite satisfied yet. He says, "Don't you play nothing on me, because I wouldn't on you. Honest Injun, you ain't a ghost?" "Honest Injun, I ain't," I says. "Well, well, that ought to settle it, of course, but I can't somehow seem to understand it no way. Look-a-here, weren't you ever murdered at all?" "No, I warn't ever murdered at all. I pleaded on them. You come in here and feel of me if you don't believe me." So he done it, and it satisfied him, and he was that glad to see me again he didn't know what to do. And he wanted to know all about it right off, because it was a grand adventure and mysterious, and so it hit him where he lived. But I said leave it alone till by and by, and told his driver to wait, and we drove off a little piece, and I told him the kind of a fix I was in, and what did he reckon we better do? He said let him alone a minute, and don't disturb him. So he thought, and pretty soon he says, "It's all right, I've got it. Take my trunk in your wagon, and let on it's yourn, and you turn back and fool along slow, so as to get to the house about the time you ought to, and I'll go towards town a piece, and take a fresh start, and get there a quarter or a half an hour after you, and you needn't let on to know me at first." I says, "All right, but wait a minute, there's one more thing, a thing that nobody don't know but me, and that is, there's a nigger here that I'm a-trying to steal out of slavery, and his name is Jim, old Miss Watson's Jim." He says, "What? Why, Jim is—" He stopped and went to studying. I says, "I know what you'll say. You'll say it's dirty, low-down business, but what if it is? I'm low-down and I'm a-going to steal him, and I want you to keep mum and not let on. Will you?" His eye lit up, and he says, "I'll help you steal him." Well, I let go all holts then, like I was shot. It was the most astonishing speech I ever heard, and I'm bound to say Tom Sawyer fell considerable in my estimation, only I couldn't believe it. Tom Sawyer a nigger-stealer. "Aw, shucks," I says, "you're joking." "I ain't joking either. "Well, then," I says, "jokin' or no jokin', if you hear anything said about a runaway nigger, don't forget to remember that you don't know nothing about him, and I don't know nothing about him." Then we took the trunk and put it on my wagon, and he drove off his way and I drove mine. But of course I forgot all about driving slow on account of being glad and full of thinking, so I got home a heap too quick for that length of a trip. The old gentleman was at the door, and he says, "Why, this is wonderful. Whoever would have thought it was in that mare to do it? I wish we'd 'a' timed her. And she hain't sweated a hair, not a hair. It's wonderful. Why, I wouldn't take $100 for that horse now, I wouldn't, honest, and yet I'd 'a' sold her for 15 before, and thought 'twas all she was worth." That's all he said. He was the innocentest, best old soul I ever see. But it warn't surprisin', because he warn't only just a farmer. He was a preacher, too, and had a little one-horse log church down back of the plantation, which he built it himself at his own expense, for a church and schoolhouse, and never charged nothin' for his preachin', and it was worth it, too. There was plenty other farmer preachers like that, and done the same way, down south. In about half an hour, Tom's wagon drove up to the front stile, and Aunt Sally she see it through the window, because it was only about 50 yards, and says, "Why, there's somebody come! I wonder who 'tis. Why, I do believe it's a stranger. Jimmy," that's one of the children, "run and tell Lize to put on another plate for dinner." Everybody made a rush for the front door, because, of course, a stranger don't come every year, and so he lays over the yaller fever for interest when he does come. Tom was over the stile and starting for the house. The wagon was spinning up the road for the village, and we was all bunched in the front door. Tom had his store clothes on, and an audience, and that was always nuts for Tom Sawyer. In them circumstances, it warn't no trouble to him to throw in an amount of style that was suitable. He warn't a boy to meeky along up that yard like a sheep. No, he come calm and important, like the ram. When he got a front of us, he lifts his hat ever so gracious and dainty, like it was the lid of a box that had butterflies asleep in it, and he didn't want to disturb them, and says, "Mr. Archibald Nichols, I presume?" "No, my boy," says the old gentleman. "I'm sorry to say your driver has deceived you. Nichols's place is down a matter of 3 mile more. Come in, come in." Tom, he took a look back over his shoulder and says, "Too late, he's out of sight." "Yes, he's gone, my son, and you must come in and eat your dinner with us, and then we'll hitch up and take you down to Nichols." "Oh, I can't make you so much trouble. I couldn't think of it. I'll walk. I don't mind the distance." "But we won't let you walk. It wouldn't be Southern hospitality to do it. Come right in." "Oh, do," says Aunt Sally. "It ain't a bit of trouble to us, not a bit in the world. You must stay. It's a long, dusty 3 mile, and we can't let you walk. And besides, I've already told him to put on another plate when I see you coming, so you mustn't disappoint us. Come right in and make yourself at home." So Tom, he thanked them very hearty and handsome, and let himself be persuaded, and come in. And when he was in, he said he was a stranger from Hicksville, Ohio, and his name was William Thompson, and he made another bow. Well, he run on and on and on, making up stuff about Hicksville and everybody in it he could invent, and I getting a little nervous and wondering how this was going to help me out of my scrape. And at last, still talking along, he reached over and kissed Aunt Sally right on the mouth, and then settled back again in his chair comfortable, and was going on talking. But she jumped up and wiped it off with the back of her hand, and says, "You owdacious puppy!" He looked kind of hurt, and says, "I'm surprised at you, ma'am." "You're What do you reckon I am? I've a good notion to taking... Say, what do you mean by kissing me?" He looked kind of humble, and says, "I didn't mean nothing, ma'am. I didn't mean no harm. I thought you'd like it." "Why, you born fool!" She took up the spinning stick, and it looked like it was all she could do to keep from giving him a crack with it. "What made you think I'd like it?" "Well, I don't know, only They told me you would." "They told you I would? Whoever told you's another lunatic. I never heard the beat of it. Who's they?" "Why, everybody. They all said so, ma'am." It was all she could do to hold in, and her eyes snapped, and her fingers worked like she wanted to scratch him, and she says, "Who's everybody? Out with their names, or there'll be an idiot short." He got up and looked distressed and fumbled his hat and says, "I'm sorry, I warn't expecting it. They told me to. They all told me to. They all said kiss her, and said she'd like it. They all said it, every one of them. But I'm sorry, ma'am, and I won't do it no more. I won't, honest." "You won't you? Well, I should reckon you won't." "No'm, I'm honest about it. I won't ever do it again, till you ask me." "Till I ask you? Well, I never see the beat of it in my born days. I lay you'll be the Methusalem numbskull of creation before ever I ask you, or the likes of you." "Well," he says, "it does surprise me so. I can't make it out somehow. They said you would, and I thought you would, but—" He stopped and looked around slow like he wished he could run across a friendly eye somewheres, and fetched up on the old gentleman's and says, "Didn't you think she'd like me to kiss her, sir?" "Why, no, well, no, I believe I didn't." Then he looks on around the same way to me and says, "Tom, didn't you think Aunt Sally'd open up her arms and say, 'Sid Sawyer'?" "My land!" she says, breaking in and jumping for him. "You impudent young rascal, to fool a body so," and was going to hug him, but he fended her off and says, "No, not till you've asked me first." So she didn't lose no time but asked him and hugged him and kissed him over and over again, and then turned him over to the old man, and he took what was left. And after they got a little quiet again, she says, "Why, dear me, I never see such a surprise. We weren't looking for you at all, but only Tom. Sis never wrote to me about anybody coming but him." "It's because it warn't intended for any of us to come but Tom," he says, "but I begged, and at the last minute she let me come too. So, coming down the river, me and Tom thought it would be a first-rate surprise for him to come here to the house first, and for me to by and by tag along and drop in, and let on to be a stranger. But it was a mistake, Aunt Sally. This ain't no healthy place for a stranger to come." "No, not impudent whelp, Sid. You ought to had your jaws boxed. I hain't been so put out since I don't know when. But I don't care, I don't mind the terms. I'd be willing to stand 1,000 such jokes to have you here." Well, to think of that performance! I don't deny it, I was most putrefied with astonishment when you give me that smack. We had dinner out in that broad open passage betwixt the house and the kitchen, and there was things enough on that table for 7 families, and all hot, too. None of your flabby tough meat that's laid in a cupboard in a damp cellar all night and tastes like a hunk of old cold cannibal in the morning. Uncle Silas, he asked a pretty long blessing over it, but it was worth it, and it didn't cool it a bit neither, the way I've seen them kind of interruptions do lots of times. There was a considerable good deal of talk all the afternoon, and me and Tom was on the lookout all the time, but it warn't no use. They didn't happen to say nothing about any runaway nigger, and we was afraid to try to work up to it. But at supper, at night, one of the little boys says, "Pa, mayn't Tom and Sid and me go to the show?" "No," says the old man, "I reckon there ain't going to be any, and you couldn't go if there was, because the runaway nigger told Burton and me all about that scandalous show, and Burton said he would tell the people, so I reckon they've drove the audacious loafers out of town before this time." So, there it was, but I couldn't help it. Tom and me was to sleep in the same room and bed, so, being tired, we bid good night and went up to bed right after supper, and clumb out of the window and down the lightning rod and shoved for the town, for I didn't believe anybody was going to give the king and the duke a hint, and so if I didn't hurry up and give them one, they'd get into trouble sure. On the road, Tom, he told me all about how it was reckoned I was murdered, and how Pap disappeared pretty soon, and didn't come back no more, and what a stir there was when Jim run away. And I told Tom all about our Royal Nonesuch rapscallions, and as much of the raft voyage as I had time to. And as we struck into the town, here comes a raging rush of people with torches, and an awful whooping and yelling and banging tin pans and blowing horns, and we jumped to one side to let them go by. And as they went by, I see they had the king and the duke astraddle of a rail. That is, I knowed it was the king and the duke, though they was all over tar and feathers, and didn't look like nothing in the world that was human, just looked like a couple of monstrous big soldier plumes. Well, it made me sick to see it, and I was sorry for them poor pitiful rascals. It seemed like I couldn't ever feel any hardness against them any more in the world. It was a dreadful thing to see. Human beings can be awful cruel to one another. We see we was too late. Couldn't do no good. We asked some stragglers about it, and they said everybody went to the show looking very innocent, and laid low and kept dark till the poor old king was in the middle of his cavortins on the stage, and then somebody give a signal and the house rose up and went for them. So we poked along back home, and I warn't feeling so brash as I was before, but kind of ornery and humble, and to blame somehow, though I hadn't done nothing. But that's always the way. It don't make no difference whether you do right or wrong. A person's conscience ain't got no sense, and just goes for him anyway. If I had a yellow dog that didn't know no more than a person's conscience does, I would poison him. It takes up more room than all the rest of a person's insides, and yet ain't no good nohow. Tom Sawyer, he says the same. End of chapter 33. Chapter 34. We stopped talking and got to thinking. By and by, Tom says, "Looky here, Huck, what fools we are not to think of it before. I bet I know where Jim is." "No, where?" "In that hut down by the ash hopper. Why, looky here, when we was at dinner, didn't you see a nigger man go in there with some victuals?" "Yes." "What did you think the victuals was for?" "For a dog." "So'd I." "Well, it wasn't for a dog." "Why?" "Because part of it was watermelon." "So it was, I noticed it. Well, it does beat all that I never thought about a dog not eating watermelon. It shows how a body can see and don't see at the same time." "Well, the nigger unlocked the padlock when he went in, and he locked it again when he came out. He fetched Uncle a key about the time we got up from the table. Same key, I bet. Watermelon shows man, lock shows prisoner, and it ain't likely there's two prisoners on such a plantation, and where the people's all so kind and good. Jim's the prisoner. All right, I'm glad we found it out detective fashion. I wouldn't give shucks for any other way. Now you work your mind and study out a plan to steal Jim, and I will study out one too, and we'll take the one we like the best." What a head for just a boy to have! If I had Tom Sawyer's head, I wouldn't trade it off to be a duke, nor mate of a steamboat, nor clown in a circus, nor nothing I can think of. I went to thinking out a plan, but only just to be doing something. I knowed very well where the right plan was going to come from. Pretty soon Tom says, "Ready?" "Yes," I says. "All right, bring it out." "My plan is this," I says. "We can easy find out if it's Jim in there, then get up to my canoe tomorrow morning and fetch my raft over from the island. Then the first dark night that comes, steal the key out of the old man's britches after he goes to bed, and shove off down the river on the raft with Jim, hiding daytimes and running nights, the way me and Jim used to do before. Wouldn't that plan work?" "Work? Why, certainly it would work, like rats a-fightin'. But it's too blame simple. There ain't nothing to it. What's a good of a plan that ain't no more trouble than that? It's as mild as goose milk. Why, Huck, it wouldn't make no more talk than breaking into a soap factory." I never said nothing, because I warn't expectin' nothing different, but I knowed mighty well that whenever he got his plan ready, it wouldn't have none of them objections to it. And it didn't. He told me what it was, and I see in a minute it was worth 15 of mine for style, and would make Jim just as free a man as mine would, and maybe get us all killed besides. So I was satisfied, and said we would waltz in on it. I needn't tell what it was here, because I knowed it wouldn't stay the way it was. I knowed he would be a-changing it around every which way as we went along, and heaving in new bullinesses whenever he got a chance, and that is what he done. Well, one thing was dead sure, and that was that Tom Sawyer was in earnest, and was actually going to help steal that nigger out of slavery. That was the thing that was too many for me. Here was a boy that was respectable and well brung up, and had a character to lose, and folks at home that had characters, and he was bright and not leather-headed, and knowing and not ignorant, and not mean but kind, and yet here he was without any more pride or rightness or feeling than to stoop to this business, and make himself ashamed and his family ashamed before everybody. I couldn't understand it no way at all. It was outrageous, and I knowed I ought to just up and tell him so, and so be his true friend, and let him quit the thing right where he was and save himself. And I did start to tell him, but he shut me up and says, "Don't you reckon I know what I'm about? Don't I generally know what I'm about?" "Yes." "Didn't I say I was going to help steal the nigger?" "Yes." "Well, then." That's all he said, and that's all I said. It weren't no use to say any more, because when he said he'd do a thing, he always done it. But I couldn't make out how he was willing to go into this thing, so I just let it go and never bothered no more about it. If he was bound to have it so, I couldn't help it. When we got home, the house was all dark and still, so we went on down to the hut by the ash hopper for to examine it. We went through the yard so as to see what the hounds would do. They knowed us, and didn't make no more noise than country dogs is always doing when anything comes by in the night. When we got to the cabin, we took a look at the front and the two sides, and on the side I warn't acquainted with, which was the north side, we found a square window hole, up tolerable high, with just one stout board nailed across it. I says, "Here's the ticket. This hole's big enough for Jim to get through if we wrench off the board." Tom says, "It's as simple as tit-tat-toe 3 in a row, and as easy as playing hooky. I should hope we can find a way that's a little more complicated than that, Huck Finn." "Well, then," I says, "how will it do to saw him out the way I done before I was murdered that time?" "That's more like," he says. "It's real mysterious and troublesome and good," he says, "but I bet we can find a way that's twice as long. There ain't no hurry. Let's keep on looking around." Betwixt the hut and the fence on the back side was a lean-to that joined the hut at the eaves, and was made out of plank. It was as long as the hut, but narrow, only about 6 foot wide. The door to it was at the south end and was padlocked. Tom, he went to the soap kettle and searched around, and fetched back the iron thing they lift the lid with, so he took it and prized out one of the staples. The chain fell down, and we opened the door and went in and shut it, and struck a match, and see the shed was only built against a cabin, and hadn't no connection with it, and there weren't no floor to the shed, nor nothing in it but some old rusty played-out hoes and spades and picks and a crippled plow. The match went out, and so did we, and shoved in the staple again, and the door was locked as good as ever. Tom was joyful. He says, "Now we're all right. We'll dig him out. It'll take about a week." Then we started for the house, and I went in the back door. You only have to pull a buckskin latch string. They don't fasten the doors. But that warn't romantical enough for Tom Sawyer. No way would do him but he must climb up the lightning rod. But after he got up halfway about 3 times, and missed fire and fell every time, and the last time most busted his brains out, he thought he'd give it up. But after he was rested, he allowed he would give her one more turn for luck, and this time he made the trip. In the morning we was up at break of day, and down to the nigger cabins to pet the dogs and make friends with the nigger that fed Jim, if it was Jim that was being fed. The niggers was just getting through breakfast and starting for the fields, and Jim's nigger was piling up a tin pan with bread and meat and things, and whilst the others was leaving, the key come from the house. This nigger had a good-natured, chuckle-headed face, and his wool was all tied up in little bunches with thread. That was to keep witches off. He said the witches was pestering him awful these nights and making him see all kinds of strange things and hear all kinds of strange words and noises, and he didn't believe he was ever witched so long before in his life. He got so worked up and got to running on so about his troubles, he forgot all about what he'd been a-going to do. So Tom says, "What's the vittles for? Going to feed the dogs?" The nigger kind of smiled around gradually over his face, like when you heave a brickbat in a mud puddle. And he says, "Yes, Mars Sid, a dog. Curious dog, too. Does you want to go and look at him?" "Yes." I hunched Tom and whispers, "You going? Right here in the daybreak? That warn't the plan." "No, it warn't, but it's a plan now." So, drat him, we went along, but I didn't like it much. When we got in, we couldn't hardly see anything, it was so dark, but Jim was there, sure enough, and he could see us, and he sings out, "Why, Huck, and good land, ain't that Mr. Tom?" I just knowed how it would be. I just expected it. I didn't know nothing to do, and if I had, I couldn't have done it, because the nigger busted in and says, "Why, to gracious sakes, do he know you gentlemen?" We could see pretty well now. Tom, he looked at the nigger, steady and kind of wondering, and says, "Does who know us?" "Why, dis yer runaway nigger." "I don't reckon he does, but what put that into your head?" "What put it there? Didn't he just dis minute sing out like he knowed you?" Tom says in a puzzled-up kind of way, "Why, that's mighty curious. Who sung out? When did he sing out? What did he sing out?" And turns to me perfectly calm and says, "Did you hear anybody sing out?" Of course there weren't nothing to be said but the one thing. So I says, "No, I ain't heard nobody say nothing." Then he turns to Jim and looks him over like he never see him before and says, "Did you sing out?" "No, suh," says Jim. "I hain't said nothing, suh." "Not a word?" "No, suh, I hain't said a word." "Did you ever see us before?" "No, suh, not as I knows on." So Tom turns to the nigger, which was looking wild and distressed, and says, kind of severe, "What do you reckon's the matter with you, anyway? What made you think somebody sung out?" "Oh, it's de dad blame witches, suh, and I wisht I was dead, I do. Dey's always at it, suh, and dey'd most kill me, dey skeers me so. Please don't tell nobody 'bout it, suh, or ole Marse Silas he'll scold me, 'cause he say dey ain't no witches. I just wish to goodness he was here now. Den what would he say? I just bet he couldn't find no way to get around it dis time. But it's always just so. People that sot stays sot. They won't look into nothing and find it out for deyselves, and when you find it out and tell 'em 'bout it, they don't believe you." Tom give him a dime and said we wouldn't tell nobody, and told him to buy some more thread to tie up his wool with, and then looks at Jim and says, "I wonder if Uncle Silas is going to hang this nigger. If I was to catch a nigger that was ungrateful enough to run away, I wouldn't give him up, I'd hang him." And whilst the nigger stepped to the door to look at the dime and bite it to see if it was good, he whispers to Jim and says, "Don't ever let on to know us, and if you hear any digging going on nights, it's us. We're going to set you free." Jim only had time to grab us by the hand and squeeze it. Then the nigger come back, and we said we'd come again sometime if the nigger wanted us to, and he said he would, more particular if it was dark, because the witches went for him mostly in the dark, and it was good to have folks around then. End of chapter 34. Chapter 35. It would be most an hour yet till breakfast, so we left and struck down into the woods, because Tom said we got to have some light to see how to dig by, and a lantern makes too much and might get us into trouble. What we must have was a lot of them rotten chunks that's called foxfire, and just makes a soft kind of a glow when you lay them in a dark place. We fetched an armful and hid it in the weeds and set down to rest, and Tom says, kind of dissatisfied, "Blame it, this whole thing is just as easy and awkward as it can be, and so it makes it so rotten difficult to get up a difficult plan. There ain't no watchman to be drugged. Now there ought to be a watchman. There ain't even a dog to give a sleeping mixture to. And there's Jim chained by one leg with a 10-foot chain to the leg of his bed. Why, all you got to do is lift up the bedstead and slip off the chain. And Uncle Silas, he trusts everybody, sends the key to the pumpkin-headed nigger, and don't send nobody to watch the nigger. Jim could have got out of that window hole before this, only there wouldn't be no use trying to travel with a 10-foot chain on his leg. Why, drat it, Huck, it's the stupidest arrangement I ever see. You got to invent all the difficulties." "Well, we can't help it. We got to do the best we can with the materials we've got. Anyhow, there's one thing. There's more honor in getting him out through a lot of difficulties and dangers where there weren't one of them furnished to you by the people who it was their duty to furnish them, and you had to contrive them all out of your own head. Now, look at just that one thing in the lantern. When you come down to the cold facts, we simply got to let on that a lantern's risky. Why, we could work with a torchlight procession if we wanted to, I believe. Now, whilst I think of it, we got to hunt up something to make a saw out of the first chance we get." "What do we want of a saw?" "What do we want of a saw? Hain't we got to saw the leg of Jim's bed off so as to get the chain loose?" "Why, you just said a body could lift up the bedstead and slip the chain off." "Well, if that ain't just like you, Huck Finn. You can get up the infant schooliest ways of going at a thing. Why, hain't you ever read any books at all? Baron Trenck, nor Casanova, nor Benvenuto Cellini, nor Henry IV, nor none of them heroes? Who ever heard of getting a prisoner loose in such an old maidy way as that? No, the way all the best authorities does is to saw the bed leg in two and leave it just so, and swallow the sawdust so it can't be found, and put some dirt and grease around the sawed place, so the very keenest senescal can't see no sign of its being sawed, and thinks the bed leg is perfectly sound. Then the night you're ready, fetch the leg a kick. Down she goes, slip off your chain, and there you are. Nothing to do but hitch your rope ladder to the battlements, shin down it, break your leg in the moat, because a rope ladder is 19 foot too short, you know. And there's your horses and your trusty vassals, and they scoop you up and fling you across the saddle, and away you go to your native Languedoc or Navarre or wherever it is. It's gaudy, Huck. I wish there was a moat to this cabin. If we get time, the night of the escape, we'll dig one." I says, "What do we want of a moat when we're going to snake him out from under the cabin?" But he never heard me. He had forgot me and everything else. He had his chin in his hand thinking. Pretty soon he sighs and shakes his head, then sighs again and says, "No, it wouldn't do. There ain't necessity enough for it." "For what?" I says. "Why, to saw Jim's leg off," he says. "Good land!" I says. "Why, there ain't no necessity for it. And what would you want to saw his leg off for anyway?" "Well, some of the best authorities has done it. They couldn't get the chain off, so they just cut their hand off and shoved, and a leg would be better still. But we got to let that go. There ain't necessity enough in this case. And besides, Jim's a nigger, wouldn't understand the reasons for it, and how it's the custom in Europe, so we'll let it go. But there's one thing. He can have a rope ladder. We can tear up our sheets and make him a rope ladder easy enough, and we can send it to him in a pie. It's mostly done that way, and I've ate worse pies." "Why, Tom Sawyer, how you talk," I says. "Jim ain't got no use for a rope ladder." "He has got use for it. How you talk, you better say. You don't know nothing about it. He's got to have a rope ladder. They all do." "What in the nation can he do with it?" "Do with it? He can hide it in his bed, can't he? That's what they all do, and he's got to, too. Huck, you don't ever seem to want to do anything that's regular. You want to be starting something fresh all the time. Suppose he don't do nothing with it. Ain't it there in his bed for a clue after he's gone? And don't you reckon they'll want clues? Of course they will. And you wouldn't leave them any? That would be a pretty howdy-do, wouldn't it? I never heard of such a thing. Well, I says, if it's in the regulations and he's got to have it, all right, let him have it, because I don't wish to go back on no regulations. But there's just one thing, Tom Sawyer. If we go to tearing up our sheets to make Jim a rope ladder, we're going to get into trouble with Aunt Sally just as sure as you're born. Now, the way I look at it, a hickory bark ladder don't cost nothing, and don't waste nothing, and is just as good to load up a pie with and hide in a straw tick as any rag ladder you can start. And as for Jim, he ain't had no experience, and so he don't care what kind of a... Oh, shucks, Huck Finn. If I was as ignorant as you, I'd keep still, that's what I'd do. Who ever heard of a state prisoner escaping by a hickory bark ladder? Why, it's perfectly ridiculous. Well, all right, Tom, fix it your own way. But if you'll take my advice, you'll let me borrow a sheet off of the clothesline. He said that would do, and that give him another idea, and he says, borrow a shirt, too. What do we want of a shirt, Tom? Want it for Jim to keep a journal on. Journal your granny. Jim can't write. Suppose he can't write. He can make marks on the shirt, can't he, if we make him a pen out of an old pewter spoon or a piece of an old iron barrel hoop? Why, Tom, we can pull a feather out of a goose and make him a better one, and quicker, too. Prisoners don't have geese running around the dungeon keep to pull pens out of, you muggins. They always make their pens out of the hardest, toughest, troublesomest piece of old brass candlestick or something like that they can get their hands on. And it takes them weeks and weeks and months to file it out, too, because they've got to do it by rubbing it on the wall. They wouldn't use a goose quill if they had it. It ain't regular. Well, then, what'll we make him the ink out of? Manny makes it out of iron rust and tears, but that's the common sort in women. The best authorities uses their own blood. Jim can do that, and when he wants to send any little common, ordinary, mysterious message to let the world know where he's captivated, he can write it on the bottom of a tin plate with a fork and throw it out of the window. The Iron Mask always done that, and it's a blame good way, too. Jim ain't got no tin plates. They feed him in a pan. That ain't nothing. We can get him some. Can't nobody read his plates. That hain't got anything to do with it, Huck. All he's got to do is write on the plate and throw it out. You don't have to be able to read it. Why, half the time you can't read anything a prisoner writes on a tin plate or anywhere else. Well, then, what's the sense in wasting the plates? Why, blame it all, it ain't the prisoner's plates. But it's somebody's plates, ain't it? Well, supposing it is, what does the prisoner care whose... He broke off there because we heard the breakfast horn blowing, so we cleared out for the house. Along during the morning I borrowed a sheet and a white shirt off of the clothesline, and I found an old sack and put them in it, and we went down and got the foxfire and put that in it too. I call it borrowing, because that was what Pap always called it, but Tom said it warn't borrowing, it was stealing. He said we was representing prisoners, and prisoners don't care how they get a thing, so they get it, and nobody don't blame them for it either. It ain't no crime in a prisoner to steal things he needs to get away with, Tom said. It's his right, and so as long as we was representing a prisoner, we had a perfect right to steal anything on this place we had the least use for to get ourselves out of prison with. He said if we weren't prisoners, it would be a very different thing, and nobody but a mean, ornery person would steal when he weren't a prisoner. So we allowed we would steal everything there was that come handy, and yet he made a mighty fuss one day after that when I stole a watermelon out of the nigger patch and ate it, and he made me go and give the niggers a dime without telling them what it was for. Tom said that what he meant was we could steal anything we needed. Well, I says I needed the watermelon, but he said I didn't need it to get out of prison with. That's where the difference was. He said if I'd wanted it to hide a knife in and smuggle it to Jim to kill the seneschal with, it would have been all right. So I let it go at that, though I couldn't see no advantage in my representing a prisoner if I got to sit down and chaw over a lot of gold-leaf distinctions like that every time I see a chance to hog a watermelon. Well, as I was saying, we waited that morning till everybody was settled down to business, and nobody in sight around the yard. Then Tom, he carried the sack into the lean-to, whilst I stood off a piece to keep watch. By and by he come out, and we went and sit down on the woodpile to talk. He says, "Everything's all right now except tools, and that's easy fixed." "Tools?" I says. "Yes." "Tools for what?" "Why, to dig with. We ain't a-going to gnaw him out, are we?" "Ain't them old crippled picks and things in there good enough to dig a nigger out with?" I says. He turns on me, looking pitying enough to make a body cry, and says, "Huck Finn, did you ever hear of a prisoner having picks and shovels and all the modern conveniences in his wardrobe to dig himself out with? Now, I want to ask you, if you got any reasonableness in you at all, what kind of a show would that give him to be a hero? Why, they might as well lend him the key and done with it. Picks and shovels, why, they wouldn't furnish 'em to a king." "Well, then," I says, "if we don't want the picks and shovels, what do we want?" "A couple of case knives." "To dig the foundation out from under that cabin with?" "Yes." "Confound it, it's foolish, Tom." "It don't make no difference how foolish it is. It's the right way, and it's the regular way, and there ain't no other way that ever I heard of, and I've read all the books that gives any information about these things. They always dig out with a case knife, and not through dirt, mind you. Generally it's through solid rock, and it takes them weeks and weeks and weeks, and forever and ever. Why, look at one of them prisoners in the bottom dungeon of the Castle Deef in the harbor of Marseilles that dug himself out that way. How long was he at it, you reckon?" "I don't know." "Well, guess." "I don't know, a month and a half." 37 years, and he come out in China. That's the kind. I wish the bottom of this fortress was solid rock." "Jim don't know nobody in China." "What's that got to do with it? Neither did that other fellow. But you're always a-wandering off on a side issue. Why can't you stick to the main point?" "All right, I don't care where he comes out, so he comes out, and Jim don't either, I reckon. But there's one thing anyway. Jim's too old to be dug out with a case knife. He won't last." "Yes, he will last, too. You don't reckon it's going to take 37 years to dig out through a dirt foundation, do you?" "How long will it take, Tom?" "Well, we can't risk being as long as we ought to, because it mayn't take very long for Uncle Silas to hear from down there by New Orleans. He'll hear Jim ain't from there. Then his next move will be to advertise Jim or something like that. So we can't risk being as long digging him out as we ought to. By rights, I reckon we ought to be a couple of years, but we can't. Things being so uncertain, what I recommend is this, that we really dig right in as quick as we can, and after that we can let on to ourselves that we was at it 37 years. Then we can snatch him out and rush him away the first time there's an alarm. Yes, I reckon that'll be the best way." "Now, there's sense in that," I says. "Letting on don't cost nothing. Letting on ain't no trouble, and if it's any object, I don't mind letting on we was at 150 year. It wouldn't strain me none, after I got my hand in. So I'll mosey along now and smouch a couple of case knives." "Smouch 3, he says. "We want to make a saw out of it." "Tom, if it ain't unregular and irreligious to suggest it," I says, "there's an old rusty saw blade around yonder, sticking under the weatherboarding behind the smokehouse." He looked kind of weary and discouraged like, and says, "It ain't no use to try to learn you nothing, Huck. Run along and smouch the knives, 3 of them." So I done it. End of chapter 35. Chapter 36. As soon as we reckoned everybody was asleep that night, we went down the lightning rod and shut ourselves up in the lean-to and got out our pile of foxfire and went to work. We cleared everything out of the way, about 4 or 5 foot along the middle of the bottom log. Tom said we was right behind Jim's bed now, and we'd dig in under it, and when we got through there, couldn't nobody in the cabin ever know there was any hole there, because Jim's counterpin hung down most to the ground, and you'd have to raise it up and look under to see the hole. So we dug and dug with the case knives till most midnight, and then we was dog-tired and our hands was blistered, and yet you couldn't see we'd done hardly anything. At last I says, "This ain't no 37-year job. This is a 38-year job, Tom Sawyer." He never said nothin', but he sighed, and pretty soon he stopped diggin', and then for a good little while I knowed that he was thinkin'. Then he says, "It ain't no use, Huck, it ain't a-goin' to work. If we was prisoners it would, because then we'd have as many years as we wanted, and no hurry, and we couldn't get but a few minutes to dig every day while they was changin' watches, and so our hands wouldn't get blistered, and we could keep it up right along, year in and year out, and do it right, and the way it ought to be done. But we can't fool along. We got to rush. We ain't got no time to spare. If we was to put in another night this way, we'd have to knock off for a week to let our hands get well. Couldn't touch a case knife with them sooner." "Well, then, what we going to do, Tom?" "I'll tell you. It ain't right, and it ain't moral, and I wouldn't like it to get out, but there ain't only just the one way. We got to dig him out with the picks and let on it's case knives." "Now you're talking," I says. "Your head gets leveler and leveler all the time, Tom Sawyer," I says. "Picks is the thing, moral or no moral. And as for me, I don't care shucks for the morality of it nohow. When I start in to steal a nigger or a watermelon or a Sunday school book, I ain't noways particular how it's done, so it's done. What I want is my nigger, or what I want is my watermelon, or what I want is my Sunday school book. And if a pick's the handiest thing, that's the thing I'm a-going to dig that nigger or that watermelon or that Sunday school book out with, and I don't give a dead rat what the authorities thinks about it nuther." "Well," he says, "there's excuse for picks and letting on in a case like this. If it warn't so I wouldn't approve of it, nor I wouldn't stand by and see the rules broke, because right is right and wrong is wrong, and a body ain't got no business doing wrong when he ain't ignorant and knows better. It might answer for you to dig Jim out with a pick, without any letting on, because you don't know no better, but it wouldn't for me because I do know better. Give me a case knife." He had his own by him, but I handed him mine. He flung it down and says, "Give me a case knife." I didn't know just what to do, but then I thought. I scratched around amongst the old tools and got a pickaxe and give it to him, and he took it and went to work and never said a word. He was always just that particular, full of principle. So then I got a shovel, and we picked and shoveled, turned about, and made the fur fly. We stuck to it about a half an hour, which is as long as we could stand up, but we had a good deal of a hole to show for it. When I got upstairs I looked out at the window and see Tom doing his level best with the lightning rod, but he couldn't come it, his hands was so sore. At last he says, "It ain't no use, it can't be done. What you reckon I better do? Can't you think of no way?" "Yes," I says, "but I reckon it ain't regular. Come up the stairs and let on it's a lightning rod." So he done it. Next day Tom stole a pewter spoon and a brass candlestick in the house for to make some pens for Jim out of, and 6 tallow candles, and I hung around the nigger cabins and laid for a chance, and stole 3 tin plates. Tom says it wasn't enough, but I said nobody wouldn't ever see the plates that Jim throwed out, because they'd fall in the dog fennel and Jimson weeds under the window hole. Then we could tote them back, and he could use them over again. So Tom was satisfied. Then he says, "Now, the thing to study out is how to get the things to Jim." "Take them in through the hole," I says, "when we get it done." He only just looked scornful and said something about nobody ever heard of such an idiotic idea, and then he went to studying. By and by he said he had ciphered out 2 or 3 ways, but there warn't no need to decide on any of them yet. Said we'd got to post Jim first. That night we went down the lightning rod a little after 10 and took one of the candles along and listened under the window hole and heard Jim snoring. So we pitched it in, and it didn't wake him. Then we whirled in with the pick and shovel, and in about 2 hours and a half the job was done. We crept in under Jim's bed and into the cabin and pawed around and found the candle and lit it and stood over Jim a while and found him looking hearty and healthy. And then we woke him up gentle and gradual. He was so glad to see us he most cried and called us honey and all the pet names he could think of, and was for having us hunt up a cold chisel to cut the chain off of his leg with right away and clearing out without losing any time. But Tom, he showed him how unregular it would be, and set down and told him all about our plans, and how we could alter them in a minute any time there was an alarm, and not to be the least afraid, because we would see he got away, sure. So Jim, he said it was all right, and we sat there and talked over old times a while. And then Tom asked a lot of questions, and when Jim told him Uncle Silas come in every day or 2 to pray with him, and Aunt Sally come in to see if he was comfortable and had plenty to eat, and both of them was as kind as they could be, Tom says, "Now I know how to fix it. We'll send you some things by them." I said, "Don't do nothing of the kind. It's one of the most jackass ideas I ever struck." But he paid no attention to me, went right on. It was his way when he'd got his plans set. So he told Jim how we'd have to smuggle in the rope ladder pie and other large things by Nat, the nigger that fed him, and he must be on the lookout and not be surprised, and not let Nat see him open them, and we would put small things in Uncle's coat pockets, and he must steal them out, and we would tie things to Aunt's apron springs, or put them in her apron pocket if we got a chance, and told him what they would be and what they was for, and told him how to keep a journal on the shirt with his blood and all that. He told him everything. Jim, he couldn't see no sense in the most of it, but he allowed we was white folks, and knowed better than him, so he was satisfied and said he would do it all just as Tom said. Jim had plenty corn-cob pipes and tobacco, so we had a right down good sociable time. Then we crawled out through the hole and so home to bed, with hands that looked like they'd been chawed. Tom was in high spirits. He said it was the best fun he ever had in his life, and the most intellectual, and said if he only could see his way to it, we would keep it up all the rest of our lives, and leave Jim to our children to get out, for he believed Jim would come to like it better and better the more he got used to it. He said that in that way it could be strung out to as much as 80 a year, and would be the best time on record, and he said it would make us all celebrated that had a hand in it. In the morning we went out to the woodpile and chopped up the brass candlestick into handy sizes, and Tom put them and the pewter spoon in his pocket. Then we went to the nigger cabins, and while I got Nat's notice off, Tom shoved a piece of candlestick into the middle of a corn pone that was in Jim's pan, and we went along with Nat to see how it would work, and it just worked noble. When Jim bit into it, it most mashed all his teeth out, and there warn't ever anything could have worked better. Tom said so himself. Jim, he never let on but what it was only just a piece of rock or something like that that's always getting into bread, you know. But after that he never bit into nothing but what he jabbed his fork into it in 3 or 4 places first. And whilst we was a-standing there in the dim-ish light, here comes a couple of the hounds, bulging in from under Jim's bed, and they kept on piling in till there was 11 of them, and there warn't hardly room in there to get your breath. By jings, we forgot to fasten that lean-to door. The nigger Nat, he only just hollered, "Witches!" once, and keeled over onto the floor amongst the dogs and begun to groan like he was dying. Tom jerked the door open and flung out a slab of Jim's meat, and the dogs went for it, and in 2 seconds he was out himself and back again and shut the door, and I knowed he'd fix the other door too. Then he went to work on the nigger, coaxing him and petting him and asking him if he'd been imagining he saw something. He raised up and blinked his eyes around and says, "Mars Sid, you'll say I's a fool, but if I didn't believe I seen most 1,000,000 dogs, or devils or summin, I wisht I made dat right here in dese tracks. I did, most sho'ly. Mars Sid, I felt 'em. I felt 'em, suh. They was all over me. They had to fetch it. I just wisht I could get my hands on one of dem witches just onct, only just onct. It's all I'd asked. But mostly I wish they'd lemme 'lone, I does." Tom says, "Well, I tell you what I think. What makes them come here, just at this runaway nigger's breakfast time? It's because they're hungry, that's the reason. You make them a witch pie. That's the thing for you to do." "But, my land, Mars Sid, how's I gwine to make 'em a witch pie? I don't know how to make it. I hain't ever hearn of such a thing before." "Well, then I'll have to make it myself." "Will you do it, honey? Will you? I'll worship the ground under your foot, I will." "All right, I'll do it, seein' it's you, and you've been good to us and showed us the runaway nigger. But you got to be mighty careful. When we come around, you turn your back, and then whatever we've put in the pan, don't you let on you see it at all. And don't you look when Jim unloads the pan. Something might happen, I don't know what. And above all, don't you handle the witch things." "Handle 'em, Mars Sid? What is you a-talking about? I wouldn't lay the weight of my finger on 'em, not for 10,000,000,000,000,000 I wouldn't." End of chapter 36. Chapter 37. That was all fixed. So then we went away and went to the rubbish pile in the backyard, where they keep the old boots and rags and pieces of bottles and wore-out tin things and all such truck, and scratched around and found an old tin washpan and stopped up the holes as well as we could to bake the pie in, and took it down cellar and stole it full of flour and started for breakfast, and found a couple of shingle nails that Tom said would be handy for a prisoner to scrabble his name and sorrows on the dungeon walls with, and dropped one of them in Aunt Sally's apron pocket, which was hanging on a chair, and the other we stuck in the band of Uncle Silas's hat, which was on the bureau, because we heard the children say their pa and ma was going to the runaway nigger's house this morning, and then went to breakfast, and Tom dropped the pewter spoon in Uncle Silas's coat pocket, and Aunt Sally wasn't come yet, so we had to wait a little while. And when she come, she was hot and red and cross, and couldn't hardly wait for the blessing, and then she went to sluicing out coffee with one hand and cracking the handiest child's head with her thimble with the other, and says, "I've hunted high and I've hunted low, and it does beat all what has become of your other shirt." My heart fell down amongst my lungs and livers and things, and a hard piece of corn crust started down my throat after it and got me on the road with a cough, and was shot across the table and took one of the children in the eye and curled him up like a fishing worm and let a cry out of him the size of a war whoop. And Tom, he turned kinder blue around the gills, and it all amounted to a considerable state of things for about a quarter of a minute, or as much as that, and I would have sold out for half price if there was a bidder. But after that, we was all right again. It was the sudden surprise of it that knocked us kind of cold. Uncle Silas, he says, "It's most uncommon curious. I can't understand it. I know perfectly well I took it off because you hain't got but one on. Just listen at the man. I know you took it off, and know it by a better way than your wool-gathering memory, too, because it was on the clothesline yesterday. I see it there myself. But it's gone. That's the long and short of it, and you'll just have to change to a red flannel one till I can get time to make a new one. And it'll be the third one I've made in 2 years. It just keeps a body on the jump to keep you in shirts, and whatever you do manage to do with 'em all is more'n I can make out. A body'd think you would learn to take some sort of care of 'em at your time of life." "I know it, Sally. I do try all I can, but it oughtn't to be altogether my fault, because, you know, I don't see them nor have nothing to do with them except when they're on me, and I don't believe I've ever lost one of them off of me." "Well, it ain't your fault if you haven't, Silas. You'd 'a' done it if you could, I reckon. And the shirt ain't all that's gone, nuther. There's a spoon gone, and that ain't all. There was 10 and now there's only 9. The calf got the shirt, I reckon, but the calf never took the spoon, that's certain." "Why, what else is gone, Sally?" "There's 6 candles gone, that's what. The rats could have got the candles, and I reckon they did. I wonder they don't walk off with the whole place, the way you're always going to stop their holes and don't do it. And if they weren't fools, they'd sleep in your hair, Silas. You'd never find it out, but you can't lay the spoon on the rats, and that I know." "Well, Sally, I'm in fault, and I acknowledge it. I've been remiss, but I won't let tomorrow go by without stopping up them holes." "Oh, I wouldn't hurry. Next year'll do. Matilda Angelina Araminta Phelps!" Whack comes the thimble, and the child snatches her claws out of the sugar bowl without fooling around any. Just then the nigger woman steps onto the passage and says, "Missus, dey's a sheet gone." "A sheet gone? Well, for the land's sake!" "I'll stop up them holes today," says Uncle Silas, looking sorrowful. "Oh, do shut up. S'pose the rats took the sheet. Where's it gone, Lize?" "Cly to goodness, I hain't no notion, Miss Sally. She was on the clothesline yisterday, but she done gone. She ain't there no more now." "I reckon the world is coming to an end. I never see the beat of it in all my born days. A shirt and a sheet and a spoon and 6 "Missus," comes a young yaller wench, "dey's a breast candlestick missing." "Clear out from here, you hussy, or I'll take a skillet to ye." Well, she was just a bilin'. I begun to lay for a chance. I reckoned I would sneak out and go for the woods till the weather moderated. She kept a-ragin' right along, running her insurrection all by herself, and everybody else mighty meek and quiet. And at last Uncle Silas, looking kind of foolish, fishes up that spoon out of his pocket. She stopped, with her mouth open and her hands up, and as for me, I wished I was in Jerusalem or somewheres, but not long, because she says, "It's just as I expected. So you had it in your pocket all the time, and like as not you've got the other things there too. How'd it get there?" "I really don't know, Sally," he says, kind of apologizing, "or you know I would tell. I was a-studying over my text in Acts 17 before breakfast, and I reckon I put it in there not noticing, meaning to put my Testament in, and it must be so because my Testament ain't in. But I'll go and see, and if the Testament is where I had it, I'll know I didn't put it in, and that will show that I laid the Testament down and took up the spoon and— Oh, for the land's sake, give a body a rest. Go along now, the whole kit and bilin' of ye, and don't come nigh me again till I've got back my peace of mind." I'd a heard her if she'd a said it to herself, let alone speaking it out, and I'd a got up and obeyed her if I'd a been dead. As we was passing through the settin' room, the old man he took up his hat, and the shingle nail fell out on the floor, and he just merely picked it up and laid it on the mantel shelf, and never said nothing, and went out. Tom see him do it, and remembered about the spoon, and says, "Well, it ain't no use to send things by him no more. He ain't reliable." Then he says, "But he done us a good turn with the spoon anyhow, without knowing it, and so we'll go and do him one without him knowing it. Stop up his rat holes." There was a noble good lot of them down cellar, and it took us a whole hour, but we done the job tight and good and ship-shape. Then we heard steps on the stairs, and blowed out our light and hid, and here comes the old man with a candle in one hand and a bundle of stuff in the other, looking as absent-minded as year before last. He went a mooning around, first to one rat hole and then another, till he'd been to them all. Then he stood about 5 minutes, picking tallow-drip off of his candle and thinking. Then he turns off slow and dreamy towards the stairs, saying, "Well, for the life of me, I can't remember when I done it. I could show her now that I warn't to blame on account of the rats. But never mind, let it go. I reckon it wouldn't do no good." And so he went on a-mumbling upstairs, and then we left. He was a mighty nice old man, and always is. Tom was a good deal bothered about what to do for a spoon, but he said we'd got to have it, so he took a think. When he had ciphered it out, he told me how we was to do. Then we went and waited around the spoon basket till we see Aunt Sally comin', and then Tom went to counting the spoons and laying them out to one side, and I slid one of them up my sleeve, and Tom says, "Why, Aunt Sally, there ain't but 9 spoons yet." She says, "Go along to your play and don't bother me. I know better. I counted 'em myself." "Well, I've counted them twice, Auntie, and I can't make but 9. She looked out of all patience, but of course she come to count. Anybody would. "I declare to gracious there ain't but 9, she says. "Why, what in the world? Plague take the things, I'll count 'em again." So I slipped back the one I had, and when she got done counting, she says, "Hang the troublesome rubbage, there's 10 now." And she looked huffy and bothered both. But Tom says, "Why, Auntie, I don't think there's 10. "You numbskull, didn't you see me count 'em?" "I know, but—" "Well, I'll count 'em again." So I smouched one, and they come out 9, same as the other time. Well, she was in a tearing way, just a trembling all over, she was so mad. But she counted and counted till she got that addled she'd start to count in a basket for a spoon sometimes, and so 3 times they come out right, and 3 times they come out wrong. Then she grabbed up the basket and slammed it across the house, and knocked the cat galley west, and she said clear out and let her have some peace, and if we came bothering her again betwixt that and dinner, she'd skin us. So we had the odd spoon, and dropped it in her apron pocket while she was a-giving us our sailing orders, and Jim got it all right, along with her shingle nail, before noon. We was very well satisfied with this business, and Tom allowed it was worth twice the trouble it took, because he said now she couldn't ever count them spoons twice alike again to save her life, and wouldn't believe she'd counted them right if she did, and said that after she'd about counted her head off for the next 3 days, he judged she'd give it up and offer to kill anybody that wanted her to ever count them any more. So we put the sheet back on the line that night and stole one out of her closet, and kept on putting it back and stealing it again for a couple of days, till she didn't know how many sheets she had any more, and she didn't care, and weren't a-going to bullyrag the rest of her soul out about it, and wouldn't count them again not to save her life. She'd druther die first. So we was all right now. As to the shirt and the sheet and the spoon and the candles, by the help of the calf and the rats and the mixed-up counting, and as to the candlestick, it warn't no consequence. It would blow over by and by. But that pie was a job. We had no end of trouble with that pie. We fixed it up away down in the woods and cooked it there, and we got it done at last, and very satisfactory, too, but not all in one day, and we had to use up 3 washpans full of flour before we got through, and we got burnt pretty much all over in places and eyes put out with the smoke, because, you see, we didn't want nothing but a crust, and we couldn't prop it up right, and she would always cave in. But of course we thought of the right way at last, which was to cook the latter, too, in the pie. So then we laid in with Jim the second night, and tore up the sheet all in little strings and twisted them together, and long before daylight we had a lovely rope that you could 'a' hung a person with. We let on it took 9 months to make it. And in the forenoon we took it down to the woods, but it wouldn't go into the pie. Being made of a whole sheet that way, there was rope enough for 40 pies if we'd 'a' wanted them, and plenty left over for soup or sausage or anything you choose. We could 'a' had a whole dinner. But we didn't need it. All we needed was just enough for the pie, and so we throwed the rest away. We didn't cook none of the pies in the washpan, afraid the solder would melt, but Uncle Silas, he had a noble brass warming pan, which he thought considerable of, because it belonged to one of his ancestors with a long wooden handle that come over from England with William the Conqueror in the Mayflower, or one of them early ships, and was hid away up garret with a lot of other old pots and things that was valuable, not on account of being any account, because they weren't, but on account of them being relics, you know. And we snaked her out private and took her down there, but she failed on the first pies, because we didn't know how, but she come up smiling on the last one. We took and lined her with dough and set her in the coals, and loaded her up with rag rope, and put on a dough roof and shut down the lid, and put hot embers on top, and stood off 5 foot, with the long handle, cool and comfortable. and in 15 minutes she turned out a pie that was a satisfaction to look at. But the person that ate it would want to fetch a couple of cags of toothpicks along, for if that rope ladder wouldn't cramp him down to business, I don't know nothing what I'm talking about, and lay him in enough stomach ache to last him till next time, too. Nat didn't look when we put the witch pie in Jim's pan, and we put the 3 tin plates in the bottom of the pan under the vittles, and so Jim got everything all right, and as soon as he was by himself he busted into the pie and hid the rope ladder inside of his straw tick, and scratched some marks on a tin plate and throwed it out of the window hole. End of chapter 37. Chapter 38. Making them pens was a distressed tough job, and so was the saw, and Jim allowed the inscription was going to be the toughest of all. That's the one which the prisoner has to scrabble on the wall. But he had to have it. Tom said he'd got to. There weren't no case of a state prisoner not scrabbling his inscription to leave behind, and his coat of arms. "Look at Lady Jane Grey," he says. "Look at Guilford Dudley. Look at old Northumberland. Why, Huck, suppose it is considerable trouble. What you going to do? How you going to get around it? Jim's got to do his inscription and coat of arms. They all do." Jim says, "Why, Mars Tom, I hain't got no coat of arm. I hain't got nothing but this year old shirt, and you knows I got to keep the journal on dat." "Oh, you don't understand, Jim. A coat of arms is very different." "Well," I says, "Jim's right anyway when he says he ain't got no coat of arms, because he hain't." "I reckon I knowed that," Tom says, "but you bet he'll have one before he gets out of this, because he's going out right, and there ain't going to be no flaws in his record." So, whilst me and Jim filed away at the pens on a brickbat apiece, Jim a-making his'n out of the brass and I making mine out of the spoon, Tom set to work to think out the coat of arms. By and by, he said he'd struck so many good ones he didn't hardly know which to take, but there was one which he reckoned he'd decide on. He says, "On the sketchin', we'll have a bend, or in the dexter base, a saltire Murray in the fess with a dog, couchant for common charge, and under his foot a chain embattled for slavery, with a chevron vert and a chief engrailed, and 3 invected lines on a field azure, with the nombral points rampant on a dancet indented, crest, a runaway nigger, sable, with his bundle over his shoulder on a bar sinister, and a couple of ghouls for supporters, which is you and me. Motto, Maggiora fretta, minora atto. Got it out of a book. Means the more haste, the less speed." "Gee willikins," I says, "but what does the rest of it mean?" "We ain't got no time to bother over that," he says. "We got to dig in like all get out." "Well, anyway," I says, "what's some of it? What's a fess?" "A fess? A fess is—" "You don't need to know what a fess is. I'll show him how to make it when he gets to it." "Shucks, Tom," I says, "I think you might tell a person. What's a bar sinister?" "Oh, I don't know, but he's got to have it. All the nobility does." That was just his way. If it didn't suit him to explain a thing to you, he wouldn't do it. You might pump at him a week, it wouldn't make no difference. He'd got all that coat of arms business fixed, so now he started in to finish up the rest of that part of the work, which was to plan out a mournful inscription. Said Jim got to have one, like they all done. He made up a lot, and wrote them out on a paper and read them off so. 1. Here a captive heart busted. 2. Here a poor prisoner, forsook by the world and friends, fretted his sorrowful life. 3. Here a lonely heart broke, and a worn spirit went to its rest after 37 years of solitary captivity. 4. Here, homeless and friendless, after 37 years of bitter captivity, perished a noble stranger, natural son of Louis XIV. Tom's voice trembled whilst he was reading them, and he most broke down. When he got done, he couldn't no way make up his mind which one for Jim to scrabble onto the wall, they was all so good, but at last he allowed he would let him scrabble them all on. Jim said it would take him a year to scrabble such a lot of truck onto the logs with a nail, and he didn't know how to make letters besides. But Tom said he would block them out for him, and then he wouldn't have nothing to do but just follow the lines. Then pretty soon he says, "Come to think, the logs ain't a-going to do. They don't have log walls in a dungeon. We got to dig the inscriptions into a rock. We'll fetch a rock." Jim said the rock was worse than the logs. He said it would take him such a pissin' long time to dig them into a rock he wouldn't ever get out. But Tom said he would let me help him do it. Then he took a look to see how me and Jim was getting along with the pens. It was most pesky tedious hard work and slow, and didn't give my hands no show to get well of the sores, and we didn't seem to make no headway hardly. So Tom says, "I know how to fix it. We got to have a rock for the coat of arms and mournful inscriptions, and we can kill 2 birds with that same rock. There's a gaudy big grindstone down at the mill, and we'll smouch it and carve the things on it and file out the pens and the saw on it too." It warn't no slouch of an idea, and it warn't no slouch of a grindstone nuther, but we'd allowed we'd tackle it. It warn't quite midnight yet, so we cleared out for the mill, leaving Jim at work. We smouched the grindstone and set out to roll her home, but it was a most nation tough job. Sometimes, do what we couldn't keep her from falling over, and she come mighty near mashing us every time. Tom said she was going to get one of us, sure, before we got through. We got her halfway, and then we was plumb played out, and most drownded with sweat. We see it warn't no use. We got to go and fetch Jim. So he raised up his bed and slid the chain off of the bed leg and wrapped it around and round his neck, and we crawled out through our hole and down there, and Jim and me laid into that grindstone and walked her along like nothing, and Tom superintended. He could out-superintend any boy I ever see. He knowed how to do everything. Our hole was pretty big, but it warn't big enough to get the grindstone through. But Jim, he took the pick and soon made it big enough. Then Tom marked out them things in it with a nail and set Jim to work on them, with the nail for a chisel and an iron bolt from the rubbish in the lean-to for a hammer, and told him to work till the rest of his candle quit on him, and then he could go to bed and hide the grindstone under his straw tick and sleep on it. Then we helped him fix his chain back on the bed leg and was ready for bed ourselves. But Tom thought of something and says, "You got any spiders in here, Jim?" "No, sah, thanks to goodness I hain't, Marse Tom." "All right, we'll get you some." "But bless you, honey, I don't want none. I's afeared of 'em. I should as soon have rattlesnakes around." Tom thought a minute or two and says, "It's a good idea, and I reckon it's been done. It must have been done, it stands to reason. Yes, it's a prime good idea. Where could you keep it?" "Keep what, Marse Tom?" "Why, a rattlesnake." "To goodness gracious alive, Marse Tom. Why, if dey was a rattlesnake to come in here, I'd take and bust right out through dat log wall, I would, with my head." "Why, Jim, you wouldn't be afraid of it after a little. You could tame it." "Tame it?" "Yes, easy enough. Every animal is grateful for kindness and petting, and they wouldn't think of hurting a person that pets them. Any book will tell you that. You try, that's all I ask. Just try for 2 or 3 days. Why, you can get him so in a little while that he'll love you and sleep with you and won't stay away from you a minute, and will let you wrap him round your neck and put his head in your mouth. Please, Mars Tom, don't talk so. I can't stand it. He let me shove his head in my mouth for a favor, hain't it? I lay he'd wait a powerful long time 'fore I asked him. And more'n dat, I don't want him to sleep with me." "Jim, don't act so foolish. A prisoner's got to have some kind of a dumb pet, and if a rattlesnake hain't ever been tried, why, there's more glory to be gained in your being the first to ever try it than any other way you could ever think of to save your life." "Why, Mars Tom, I don't want no such glory. Snake take and bite Jim's chin off. Then what is the glory? No, sir, I don't want no such doings." "Blame it, can't you try? I only want you to try. You needn't keep it up if it don't work." "But the trouble all done if the snake bite me while I's a-tryin' him. Mars Tom, I's willin' to tackle most anything 'at ain't unreasonable, but if you and Huck fetches a rattlesnake in here for me to tame, I's gwine to leave, that's shore." "Well, then let it go. Let it go if you're so bullheaded about it. We can get you some garter snakes, and you can tie some buttons on their tails and let on the rattlesnakes, and I reckon that'll have to do." "I can stand dem, Mars Tom, but blame if I couldn't get along without 'em, I tell you dat. I never knowed before 'twas so much bother and trouble to be a prisoner." "Well, it always is when it's done right. You got any rats around here?" "No, sah, I hain't seed none." "Well, we'll get you some rats." "Why, Mars Tom, I don't want no rats. Dey's the dad-blamedest creatures disturb a body and rustle round over him and bite his feet when he's trying to sleep I ever see. No, sir, gimme garter snakes if I's got to have 'em, but don't gimme no rats. I hain't got no use for 'em, scasely." "But, Jim, you got to have 'em. They all do. So don't make no more fuss about it. Prisoners ain't ever without rats. There ain't no instance of it. And they train them and pet them and learn them tricks, and they get to be as sociable as flies. But you got to play music to them. You got anything to play music on?" "I ain't got nothing but a coast comb and a piece of paper and a juice harp, but I reckon they wouldn't take no such stock in a juice harp." "Yes, they would. They don't care what kind of music 'tis. A juice harp's plenty good enough for a rat. All animals like music. In a prison they dote on it. 'Specially painful music, and you can't get no other kind out of a Jew's harp. It always interests them. They come out to see what's the matter with you. Yes, you're all right. You're fixed very well. You want to sit on your bed nights before you go to sleep and early in the mornings and play your Jew's harp. Play 'The Last Link is Broken.' That's the thing that'll scoop a rat quicker'n anything else. When you've played about 2 minutes you'll see all the rats and the snakes and spiders and things begin to feel worried about you and come, and they'll just fairly swarm over you and have a noble good time." "Yes, they will, I reckon, Mars Tom. But what kinder time is Jim having? Bless if I can see the point. But I'll do it if I got to. I reckon I better keep the animals satisfied and not have no trouble in the house." Tom waited to think it over and see if there weren't nothing else, and pretty soon he says, "Oh, there's one thing I forgot. Could you raise a flower here, do you reckon?" "I don't know, but maybe I could, Mars Tom. But it's tolerable dark in here, and I ain't got no use for no flower nohow, and she'd be a powerful sight of trouble." "Well, you try it anyway. Some other prisoners has done it." "One of them big cattail-looking mullein stalks would grow in here, Mars Tom, I reckon, but she wouldn't be worth half the trouble she'd cost." "Don't you believe it. We'll fetch you a little one, and you plant it in the corner over there and raise it. And don't call it mullein, call it pitchiola. That's its right name when it's in a prison. And you want to water it with your tears." "Why, I got plenty spring water, Mars Tom." "You don't want spring water. You want to water it with your tears. It's the way they always do." "Why, Mars Tom, I lay I can raise one of them mullein stalks twice with spring water, whiles another man's a-starting one with tears." "That ain't the idea. You got to do it with tears." "She'll die on my hands, Mars Tom. She surely will, 'cause I don't scasely ever cry." So Tom was stumped, but he studied it over and then said Jim would have to worry along the best he could with an onion. He promised he would go to the nigger cabins and drop one, private, in Jim's coffee pot in the morning. Jim said he would just as soon have tobacco in his coffee, and found so much fault with it, and with the work and bother of raising the mullein, and Jew's harping the rats, and petting and flattering up the snakes and spiders and things, on top of all the other work he had to do on pens and inscriptions and journals and things, which made it more trouble and worry and responsibility to be a prisoner than anything he ever undertook, that Tom most lost all patience with him, and said he was just loading down with more gaudier chances than a prisoner ever had in the world to make a name for himself, and yet he didn't know enough to appreciate them, and they was just about wasted on him. So Jim, he was sorry, and said he wouldn't behave so no more, and then me and Tom shoved for bed. End of chapter 38. Chapter 39. In the morning, we went up to the village and bought a wire rat trap and fetched it down and unstopped the best rat hole, and in about an hour we had 15 of the bulliest kind of ones, and then we took it and put it in a safe place under Aunt Sally's bed. But while we was gone for spiders, little Thomas Franklin Benjamin Jefferson Alexander Phelps found it there and opened the door of it to see if the rats would come out, and they did. And Aunt Sally, she come in, and when we got back she was a-standing on top of the bed, raising Cain, and the rats was doing what they could to keep off the dull times for her. So she took and dusted us both with the hickory, and we was as much as 2 hours catching another 15 or 16. Drat that meddlesome cub, and they weren't the likeliest nother, because the first haul was the pick of the flock. I never see a likelier lot of rats than what that first haul was. We got a splendid stock of sorted spiders and bugs and frogs and caterpillars and one thing or another, and we like to got a hornet's nest, but we didn't. The family was at home. We didn't give it right up, but stayed with them as long as we could, because we allowed we'd tire them out, or they'd got to tire us out, and they done it. Then we got alicompane and rubbed on the places and was pretty near all right again, but couldn't set down convenient. And so we went for the snakes, and grabbed a couple of dozen garters and house snakes, and put them in a bag and put it in our room. And by that time it was supper time, and a rattling good honest day's work. And hungry? Oh, no, I reckon not. And there weren't a blessed snake up there when we went back. We didn't half-tie the sack, and they worked out somehow and left. But it didn't matter much, because they was still on the premises somewheres. So we judged we could get some of them again. No, there weren't no real scarcity of snakes about the house for a considerable spell. You'd see them dripping from the rafters in places every now and then, and they generally landed in your plate or down the back of your neck, and most of the time where you didn't want them. Well, they was handsome and striped, and there weren't no harm in a million of them, but that never made no difference to Aunt Sally. She despised snakes, be the breed what they might, and she couldn't stand them no way you could fix it. And every time one of them flopped down on her, it didn't make no difference what she was doing. She would just lay that work down and light out. I never see such a woman. And you could hear her whoop to Jericho. You couldn't get her to take a hold of one of them with the tongs. And if she turned over and found one in bed, she would scramble out and lift a howl that you would think the house was afire. She disturbed the old man so that he said he could most wish there hadn't ever been no snakes created. Why, after every last snake had been gone clear out of the house for as much as a week, Aunt Sally warn't over it yet. She warn't near over it. When she was settin' thinking about something, you could touch her on the back of her neck with a feather, and she would jump right out of her stockings. It was very curious. But Tom said all women was just so. He said they was made that way for some reason or other. We got a lickin' every time one of our snakes come in her way, and she allowed these lickings weren't nothing to what she would do if we ever loaded up the place again with them. I didn't mind the lickings, because they didn't amount to nothing, but I minded the trouble we had to lay in another lot. But we got them laid in, and all the other things, and you never see a cabin as blithesome as Jim's was when they'd all swarm out for music and go for him. Jim didn't like the spiders, and the spiders didn't like Jim, and so they'd lay for him and make it mighty warm for him. And he said that between the rats and the snakes and the grindstone, there weren't no room in bed for him scasely. And when there was, a body couldn't sleep, it was so lively, and it was always lively, he said, because they never all slept at one time, but took turn about. So when the snakes was asleep, the rats was on deck, and when the rats turned in, the snakes come on watch. So he always had one gang under him in his way, and the other gang having a circus over him. And if he got up to hunt a new place, the spiders would take a chance at him as he crossed over. He said if he ever got out this time, he wouldn't ever be a prisoner again. Not for a salary. Well, by the end of 3 weeks, everything was in pretty good shape. The shirt was sent in early, in a pie, and every time a rat bit Jim he would get up and write a little in his journal whilst the ink was fresh. The pens was made, the inscriptions and so on was all carved on the grindstone, the bed leg was sawed in two, and we had et up the sawdust, and it give us a most amazing stomach ache. We reckoned we was all going to die, but didn't. It was the most undigestible sawdust I ever see, and Tom said the same. But, as I was saying, we'd got all the work done now at last, and we was all pretty much fagged out, too, but mainly Jim. The old man had wrote a couple of times to the plantation below Orleans to come and get their runaway nigger, but hadn't got no answer, because there weren't no such plantation. So he allowed he would advertise Jim in the St. Louis and New Orleans papers, and when he mentioned the St. Louis ones, it give me the cold shivers, and I see we hadn't no time to lose. So Tom said, "Now for the anonymous letters." "What's them?" I says. "Warnings to the people that something is up. Sometimes it's done one way, sometimes another, but there's always somebody spying around that gives notice to the governor of the castle. When Louis XVI was going to light out of the Tuileries, a servant girl done it. It's a very good way, and so is the anonymous letters. We'll use them both, and it's usual for the prisoner's mother to change clothes with him, and she stays in, and he slides out in her clothes. We'll do that, too." "But look-a-here, Tom, what do we want to warn anybody for that something's up? Let them find it out for themselves. It's their lookout." "Yes, I know, but you can't depend on them. It's the way they've acted from the very start, left us to do everything. They're so confiding and mullet-headed, they don't take notice of nothing at all. So if we don't give them notice, there won't be nobody nor nothing to interfere with us, and so after all our hard work and trouble, this escape'll go off perfectly flat. Won't amount to nothing. Won't be nothing to it." "Well, as for me, Tom, that's the way I'd like." "Shucks," he says, and looked disgusted. So I says, "But I ain't going to make no complaint. Any way that suits you suits me. What you going to do about the servant girl?" "You'll be her. You slide in the middle of the night and hook that yaller girl's frock." "Why, Tom, that'll make trouble next morning, because of course you probably hain't got any but that one." "I know, but you don't want it but 15 minutes to carry the anonymous letter and shove it under the front door." "All right, then, I'll do it, but I could carry it just as handy in my own togs." "You wouldn't look like a servant girl then, would you?" "No, but there won't be nobody to see what I look like anyway." "That ain't got nothing to do with it. The thing for us to do is just to do our duty, and not worry about whether anybody sees us do it or not. Hain't you got no principle at all?" "All right, I ain't saying nothing. I'm the servant girl. Who's Jim's mother?" "I'm his mother. I'll hook a gown from Aunt Sally." "Well, then, you'll have to stay in the cabin when me and Jim leaves." "Not much. I'll stuff Jim's clothes full of straw and lay it on his bed to represent his mother in disguise, and Jim will take the nigger woman's gown off of me and wear it, and we'll all evade together. When a prisoner of style escapes, it's called an evasion. It's always called so when a king escapes, for instance. And the same with a king's son. It don't make no difference whether he's a natural one or an unnatural one." So Tom, he wrote the anonymous letter, and I smouched the yaller wench's frock that night and put it on and shoved it under the front door the way Tom told me to. It said, "Beware, trouble is brewin'. Keep a sharp lookout. Unknown friend." Next night we stuck a picture which Tom drawed in blood of a skull and crossbones on the front door, and next night another one of a coffin on the back door. I never see a family in such a sweat. They couldn't have been worse scared if the place had been full of ghosts laying for them behind everything and under the beds and shivering through the air. If a door banged, Aunt Sally she jumped and said ouch if anything fell. She jumped and said ouch if you happened to touch her. When she weren't noticing, she done the same. She couldn't face Snow Way and be satisfied, 'cause she allowed there was something behind her every time, so she was always a-whirling around sudden and saying ouch, and before she got 2/3 around she'd whirl back again and say it again, and she was afraid to go to bed, but she dasn't set up. So the thing was working very well, Tom said. He said he never seen anything work more satisfactory. He said it showed it was done right. So he said, now for the grand bulge. So the very next morning at the streak of dawn we got another letter ready and was wondering what we better do with it, because we heard them say at supper they was going to have a nigger on watch at both doors all night. Tom, he went down the lightning rod to spy around, and the nigger at the back door was asleep, and he stuck it in the back of his neck and come back. This letter said, "Don't betray me. I wish to be your friend. There's a desperate gang of cutthroats from over in the Indian Territory going to steal your runaway nigger tonight, and they have been trying to scare you so as you will stay in the house and not bother them. I am one of the gang, but have got religion, and wish to quit it and lead an honest life again, and will betray the hellish design. They will sneak down from northards along the fence at midnight exact with a false key, and go in the nigger's cabin to get him. I am to be off a piece and blow a tin horn if I see any danger, but stead of that I will baa like a sheep as soon as they get in, and not blow at all. Then whilst they are getting his chains loose, you slip there and lock them in, and can kill them at your leisure. Don't do anything but just the way I am telling you. If you do, they will suspicion something, and raise whoop jamboree hoo. I do not wish any reward, but to know I have done the right thing. Unknown Friend." End of chapter 39. Chapter 40. We was feeling pretty good after breakfast, and took the canoe and went over the river a-fishing with a lunch, and had a good time, and took a look at the raft and found her all right, and got home late to supper, and found them in such a sweat and worry they didn't know which end they was standing on, and made us go right off to bed the minute we was done supper, and wouldn't tell us what the trouble was, and never let on a word about the new letter, but didn't need to because we knowed as much about it as anybody did. And as soon as we was half upstairs and her back was turned, we slid for the cellar cupboard and loaded up a good lunch and took it up to our room and went to bed and got up about 11:30, and Tom put on Aunt Sally's dress that he stole and was going to start with the lunch, but says, "Where's the butter?" "I laid out a hunk of it," I says, "on a piece of a corn pone." "Well, you left it laid out then. It ain't here." "We can get along without it," I says. "We can get along with it, too," he says. "Just you slide down cellar and fetch it, and then mosey right down the lightning rod and come along. I'll go and stuff the straw into Jim's clothes to represent his mother in disguise, and be ready to baa like a sheep and shove soon as you get there." So out he went, and down cellar went I. The hunk of butter, big as a person's fist, was where I had left it, so I took up the slab of corn pone with it on, and blowed out my light, and started upstairs very stealthy, and got up to the main floor all right, but here comes Aunt Sally with a candle, and I clapped the truck in my hat and clapped my hat on my head, and the next second she see me, and she says, "You been down cellar?" "Yes'm." "What you been doing down there?" "Nothing." "Nothing?" "No'm." "Well, then what possessed you to go down there this time of night?" "I don't know'm." "You don't know? Don't answer me that way, Tom. I want to know what you been doing down there." "I ain't been doing a single thing, Aunt Sally. I hope to gracious if I have." I reckon she'd let me go now, and as a general thing she would, but I suppose there were so many strange things going on she was just in a sweat about every little thing that warn't yardstick straight, so she says, very decided, "You just march into that settin' room and stay there till I come. You been up to something you no business to, and I lay I'll find out what it is before I'm done with you." So she went away as I opened the door and walked into the settin' room. My, but there was a crowd there. 15 farmers, and every one of them had a gun. I was most powerful sick, and slunk to a chair and set down. They was sitting around, some of them talking a little, in a low voice, and all of them fidgety and uneasy, but trying to look like they warn't. But I knowed they was, because they was always taking off their hats and putting them on and scratching their heads and changing their seats and fumbling with their buttons. I warn't easy myself, but I didn't take my hat off all the same. I did wish Aunt Sally would come and get done with me and lick me if she wanted to, and let me get away and tell Tom how we'd overdone this thing and what a thunderin' hornet's nest we got ourselves into, so we could stop fooling around straight off and clear out with Jim before these rips got out of patience and come for us. At last she come and begun to ask me questions, but I couldn't answer them straight. I didn't know which end of me was up, because these men was in such a fidget now that some of them was wanting to start right now and lay for them desperadoes, and saying it warn't but a few minutes to midnight, and others was trying to get them to hold on and wait for the sheep signal, and here was Auntie pegging away at the questions, and me a shaking all over and ready to sink down in my tracks, I was that scared, and the place getting hotter and hotter, and the butter beginning to melt and run down my neck and behind my ears, and pretty soon when one of them says, "I'm for going and getting in the cabin first, and right now, and catching them when they come," I most dropped, and a streak of butter come a-trickling down my forehead, and Aunt Sally she sees it, and turns white as a sheet and says, "For the land's sake, what is the matter with the child? He's got the brain fever as sure as you're born, and they're oozing out." And everybody runs to see, and she snatches off my hat, and out comes the bread and what was left of the butter, and she grabbed me and hugged me and says, "Oh, what a turn you did give me, and how glad and grateful I am it ain't no worse, for luck's against us, and it never rains but it pours, and when I see that truck I thought we'd lost you, for I knowed by the color and all it was just like your brains would be if— Dear, why didn't you tell me that was what you'd been down there for? I wouldn't have cared. Now clear out to bed and don't let me see no more of you till morning." I was upstairs in a second, and down the lightning rod in another one, and shinning through the dark for the lean-to. I couldn't hardly get my words out, I was so anxious, but I told Tom as quick as I could we must jump for it now, and not a minute to lose, the house full of men yonder, with guns. His eyes just blazed, and he says, "No, is that so? Ain't it bully? Why, Huck, if I was to do it over again, I bet I could fetch 200. If we could put it off till—" "Hurry, I says. "Where's Jim?" "Right at your elbow. If you reach out your arm, you can touch him. He's dressed and everything's ready. Now we'll slide out and give the sheep signal." But then we heard the tramp of men come into the door, and heard them begin to fumble with the padlock, and heard a man say, "I told you we'd be too soon. They haven't come. The door's locked. Here, I'll lock some of you into the cabin, and you lay for 'em in the dark, and kill 'em when they come, and the rest scatter round a piece and listen if you can hear 'em coming." So in they come, but couldn't see us in the dark, and most tried on us whilst we was hustling to get under the bed. But we got under all right and out through the hole, swift but soft. Jim first, me next, and Tom last, which was according to Tom's orders. Now we was in the lean-to, and heard trampin's close by outside, so we crept to the door, and Tom stopped us there and put his eye to the crack, but couldn't make out nothing, it was so dark, and whispered and said he would listen for the steps to get further, and when he nudged us Jim must slide out first and him last. So he set his ear to the crack and listened and listened and listened, and the steps a-scraping around out there all the time, and at last he nudged us, and we slid out and stooped down, not breathing, and not making the least noise, and slipped stealthy towards the fence in Injun file, and got to it all right, and me and Jim over it, but Tom's britches catched fast on a splinter on the top rail, and then he hear the steps coming, so he had to pull loose, which snapped the splinter and made a noise, and as he dropped in our tracks and started, somebody sings out, "Who's that? Answer or I'll shoot." But we didn't answer. We just unfurled our heels and shoved. Then there was a rush and a bang, 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 and the bullets fairly whizzed around us. We heard them sing out, "Here they are! They broke for the river! After 'em, boys, and turn loose the dogs!" So here they come, full tilt. We could hear them because they wore boots and yelled, but we didn't wear no boots and didn't yell. We was in the path to the mill, and when they got pretty close on to us we dodged into the bush and let them go by, and then dropped in behind them. They'd had all the dogs shut up so they wouldn't scare off the robbers, but by this time somebody had let them loose, and here they come, making powwow enough for 1,000,000, but they was our dogs, so we stopped in our tracks till they catched up, and when they see it warn't nobody but us, and no excitement to offer them, they only just said howdy, and tore right ahead towards the shouting and clattering, and then we up steam again and whizzed along after them till we was nearly to the mill, and then struck up through the bush to where my canoe was tied, and hopped in and pulled for dear life towards the middle of the river, but didn't make no more noise than we was obleeged to. Then we struck out, easy and comfortable, for the island where my raft was, and we could hear them yelling and barking at each other all up and down the bank, till we was so far away the sounds got dim and died out, and when we stepped onto the raft, I says, "Now, old Jim, you're a free man again, and I bet you won't ever be a slave no more." And a mighty good job it was, too, Huck. It is planned beautiful, and it is done beautiful, and they ain't nobody can get up a plan that's more mixed up and splendid than what that one was. We was all glad as we could be, but Tom was the gladdest of all, because he had a bullet in the calf of his leg. When me and Jim heard that, we didn't feel so brash as what we did before. It was hurting him considerable and bleeding, so we laid him in the wigwam and tore up one of the Duke's shirts for to bandage him. But he says, "Gimme the rags. I can do it myself. Don't stop now, don't fool around here, and the evasion booming along so handsome. Man the sweeps and set her loose. Boys, we done it elegant, 'deed we did. I wish we'd 'a' had the handling of Louis 16. There wouldn't been a no son of St. Louis ascend to heaven, wrote down in his biography. No, sir, we'd 'a' whooped him over the border. That's what we'd 'a' done with him, and done it just as slick as nothing at all, too. Man the sweeps! Man the sweeps!" But me and Jim was consulting and thinking, and after we'd thought a minute, I says, "Say it, Jim." So he says, "Well, then this is the way it looked to me, Huck. If it was him that is being set free, one of the boys was to get shot, would he say, 'Go on and save me, never mind by the doctor for to save this one'? Is dat like Mars Tom Sawyer? Would he say dat? You bet he wouldn't. Well, then is Jim gwine to say it? No, sir. I don't budge a step out'n dis place dout a doctor, not if it's 40 year." I knowed he was white inside, and I reckoned he'd say what he did say, so it was all right now, and I told Tom I was a-going for a doctor. He raised considerable row about it, but me and Jim stuck to it and wouldn't budge, so he was for crawling out and setting the raft loose himself, but we wouldn't let him. Then he gives us a piece of his mind, but it didn't do no good. So when he sees me getting the canoe ready, he says, "Well, then, if you're bound to go, I'll tell you the way to do when you get to the village. Shut the door and blindfold the doctor tight and fast, and make him swear to be silent as the grave, and put a purse full of gold in his hand, and then take and lead him all around the back alleys and everywheres in the dark, and then fetch him here in the canoe in a roundabout way amongst the islands, and search him and take his chalk away from him, and don't give it back to him until you get him back to the village, or else he will chalk this raft so he can find it again. It's the way they all do." So I said I would, and left, and Jim was to hide in the woods when he sees the doctor coming till he was gone again. End of Chapter 40. Chapter 41. The doctor was an old man, a very nice, kind-looking old man when I got him up. I told him me and my brother was over on Spanish Island hunting yesterday afternoon, and camped on a piece of raft we found. And about midnight he must have kicked his gun in his dreams, for it went off and shot him in the leg, and we wanted him to go over there and fix it and not say nothing about it, nor let nobody know, because we wanted to come home this evening and surprise the folks. "Who is your folks?" he says. "The Phelpses, down yonder." "Oh," he says, and after a minute he says, "How'd you say he got shot?" "He had a dream," I says, "and it shot him." "Singular dream," he says. So he lit up his lantern and got his saddlebags and we started, but when he sees the canoe he didn't like the look of her, said she was big enough for one but didn't look pretty safe for two. I says, "Oh, you needn't be afeard, sir. She carried the three of us easy enough." "What three?" "Why, me and Sid and the guns. That's what I mean." "Oh," he says. But he put his foot on the gunwale and rocked her and shook his head and said he reckoned he'd look round for a bigger one, but they was all locked and chained. So he took my canoe and said for me to wait till he come back, or I could hunt around further, or maybe I better go down home and get them ready for the surprise if I wanted to. But I said I didn't, so I told him just how to find the raft, and then he started. I struck an idea pretty soon. I says to myself, supposin' he can't fix that leg just in 3 shakes of a sheep's tail, as the sayin' is. Supposin' it takes him 3 or 4 days. What are we going to do, lay around there till he lets the cat out of the bag? No, sir, I know what I'll do. I'll wait. When he comes back, if he says he's got to go any more, I'll get down there too, if I swim, and we'll take and tie him and keep him and shove out down the river. And when Tom's done with him, we'll give him what it's worth, or all we got, and then let him get ashore. So then I crept into a lumber pile to get some sleep, and next time I waked up the sun was away up over my head. I shot out and went for the doctor's house, but they told me he'd gone away in the night sometime or other and warn't back yet. Well, thinks I, that looks powerful bad for Tom, and I'll dig out for the island right off. So away I shoved, and turned the corner, and nearly rammed my head into Uncle Silas's stomach. He says, "Why, Tom, where you been all this time, you rascal?" "I hain't been nowheres," I says, "only just hunting for the runaway nigger, me and Sid." "Why, wherever did you go?" he says. "Your auntie's been mighty uneasy." "She needn't," I says, "because we was all right. We followed the men and the dogs, but they outrun us and we lost them. But we thought we heard them on the water, so we got a canoe and took out after them and crossed over, but couldn't find nothing to them, so we cruised along up shore till we got kind of tired and beat out, and tied up the canoe and went to sleep and never waked up till about an hour ago. Then we paddled over here to hear the news, and Sid's at the post office to see what he can hear, and I'm a-branching out to get something to eat for us, and then we're going home." So then we went to the post office to get Sid, but just as I suspicioned he weren't there. So the old man he got a letter out of the office, and we waited a while longer, but Sid didn't come. So the old man said, come along, let Sid foot it home, or canoe it, when he got done fooling around, but we would ride. I couldn't get him to let me stay and wait for Sid, and he said there warn't no use in it, and I must come along, and let Aunt Sally see we was all right. When we got home, Aunt Sally was that glad to see me she laughed and cried both, and hugged me and give me one of them lickings of hern that don't amount to shucks, and said she'd serve Sid the same when he come. And the place was plumb full of farmers and farmers' wives to dinner, and such another clack a body never heard. Old Mrs. Hotchkiss was the worst. Her tongue was a-going all the time. She says, "Well, Sister Phelps, I've ransacked that 'ere cabin over, and I believe the nigger was crazy. I says to Sister Damrell, didn't I, Sister Damrell? Says I, he's crazy, says I. Them's the very words I said. You all hearin' me. He's crazy, says I. Everything shows it, says I. Look at that 'ere grindstone, says I. Want to tell me to any creature in his right mind's going to scrabble all them crazy things onto a grindstone, says I. Here such and such in person busted his heart, and here so-and-so pegged along for 37 year, and all that. Natural son of Lewis, somebody, and such everlasting rubbish. He's plumb crazy, says I. That's what I says in the first place. It's what I says in the middle, and it's what I says last and all the time. The nigger's crazy. Crazy's Nebuchadnezzar, says I." "And look at that 'ere ladder, made out in rags, Sister Hotchkiss," said old Mrs. Damrell. "What in the name of goodness could he ever want of—" "The very words I was a-saying no longer than this minute to Sister Utterback, and she'll tell you so herself. Says she, look at that 'ere rag ladder, says she, and says I, yes, look at it, says I. What could he have wanted of it, says I? She, Sister Hotchkiss, she. But how in the nation they'd ever get that grindstone in there, anyway? And who dug that 'ere hole? And who—" "My very words, Brer Penrod. I was a-sayin', pass that 'ere sasser and molasses, won't ye? I was a-sayin' to Sister Dunlap just this minute, how did they get that grindstone in there, says I? Without help, mind you, without help. That's where 'tis. Don't tell me, says I. There was help, says I, and there was a plenty help too, says I. There's been a dozen of helping that nigger, and I laid I'd skin every last nigger on this place, but I'd find out who done it, says I, and moreover, says I—" "A dozen, says you. 40 couldn't have done everything that's been done. Look at them case-knife saws and things, how tedious they've been made. Look at that bed leg sawed off with them. A week's work for 6 men. Look at that nigger made out in straw on the bed, and look at—" You may well say it, Brer Hightower. It's just as I was saying to Brer Phelps' own self. Says-he, what do you think of it, Sister Hotchkiss, says-he? Think of what, Brer Phelps, says I. Think of that bed leg sawed off that-a-way, says-he. Think of it, says I lay I never sawed itself off, says I. Somebody sawed it, says I. That's my opinion, take it or leave it. It mayn't be no count, says I, but such as it is, it's my opinion, says I. And if anybody can start a better one, says I, let him do it, says I, that's all. I says to Sister Dunlap, says I, well, dog my cats. They must have been a house full of niggers in there every night for 4 weeks to have done all that work, Sister Phelps. Look at that shirt. Every last inch of it covered over with secret African writing done with blood. Must have been a raft of 'em at it right along, all the time a'most. Why, I'd give $2 to have it read to me. And as for the niggers that wrote it, I allow I'd take and lash 'em till— People to help him, Brother Marples? Well, I reckon you'd think so if you'd been in this house for a while back. Why, they've stole everything they could lay their hands on, and we a-watching all the time, mind you. They stole that shirt right off of the line, and as for that sheet they made the rag ladder out of, there ain't no telling how many times they didn't steal that. And flour and candles and candlesticks and spoons and the old warming pan, and most 1,000 things that I disremember now, and my new calico dress, and me and Silas and my Sid and Tom on the constant watch, day and night, as I was a-telling you, and not a one of us could catch hide nor hair, nor sight nor sound of them. And here at the last minute, lo and behold you, they slides right in under our noses and fools us. Not only fools us, but the Injun Territory robbers, too, and actually gets away with that nigger safe and sound, and with that 16 men and 22 dogs right on their very heels at that very time. I tell you, it just bangs anything I ever heard of. Why, spirits couldn't have done it better and been no smarter, and I reckon they must have been spirits, because you know our dogs, and there ain't no better. Well, them dogs never even got on the track of 'em once. You explain that to me if you can, any of you. Well, it does beat. Laws alive, I never— So help me, I wouldn't be— House thieves as well as— Goodness gracious sakes, I'd have been afeard to live in such a— Afraid to live? Why, I was that scared I dasn't hardly go to bed, or get up, or lay down, or set down, Sister Ridgway. Why, they'd steal the very— Why, goodness sakes, you can guess what kind of a fluster I was in by the time midnight come last night. I hope to gracious if I weren't afraid they'd steal some of the family. I was just to that pass I didn't have no reasoning faculties no more. It looks foolish enough now in the daytime, but I says to myself, there's my 2 poor boys asleep way upstairs in that lonesome room, and I declare to goodness I was that uneasy that I crept up there and locked 'em in, I did. And anybody would, because, you know, when you get scared that way, and it keeps running on and getting worse and worse all the time, and your wits get to addling, and you get to doing all sorts of wild things, and by you think to yourself, supposing I was a boy, and was away up here, and the door ain't locked, and you— She stopped, looking kind of wondering, and then she turned her head around slow. When her eye lit on me, I got up and took a walk. Says I to myself, I can explain better how we come to not be in that room this morning if I go out to one side and study over it a little. So I done it, but I dasn't go fur, or she'd 'a sent for me. And when it was late in the day, the people all went. And then I come in and told her the noise and shooting waked up me and Sid, and the door was locked, and we wanted to see the fun. So we went down the lightning rod, and both of us got hurt a little, and we didn't never want to try that no more. And then I went on and told her all what I told Uncle Silas before. And then she said she'd forgive us, and maybe it was all right enough anyway, and about what a body might expect of boys, for all boys was a pretty harum-scarum lot as fur as she could see. And so, as long as no harm hadn't come of it, she judged she better put in her time being grateful we was alive and well, and she had us still, 'stead of fretting over what was past and done. So then she kissed me and patted me on the head, and dropped into a kind of a brown study, and pretty soon jumps up and says, "Why, laws a mercy, it's most night and Sid's not come yet. What has become of that boy?" I see my chance, so I skips up and says, "I'll run right up to town and get him," I says. "No, you won't," she says. You'll stay right where you are. One's enough to be lost at a time. If he ain't here to supper, your uncle'll go." Well, he warn't there to supper, so right after supper Uncle went. He come back about 10, a little bit uneasy. Hadn't run across Tom's tracks. Aunt Sally was a good deal uneasy, but Uncle Silas, he said there warn't no occasion to be. Boys will be boys, he said, and you'll see this one turn up in the morning all sound and right. So she had to be satisfied, but she said she'd set up for him a while anyway and keep a light burning so he could see it. And then, when I went to bed, she come up with me and fetched her candle and tucked me in and mothered me so good I felt mean, and like I couldn't look her in the face. And she sat down on the bed and talked with me a long time, and said what a splendid boy Sid was, and didn't seem to want to ever stop talking about him, and kept asking me every now and then if I reckoned he could 'a' got lost or hurt, or maybe drownded, and might be layin' at this minute somewhere sufferin' or dead, and she not by him to help him. And so the tears would drip down silent, and I would tell her that Sid was all right and would be home in the morning, sure. And she would squeeze my hand or maybe kiss me and tell me to say it again and keep on saying it, because it done her good and she was in so much trouble. And when she was going away, she looked down in my eyes so steady and gentle and says, "The door ain't going to be locked, Tom, and there's the window and the rod, but you'll be good, won't you? And you won't go? For my sake." Laws knows, I wanted to go bad enough to see about Tom, and was all intending to go, but after that I wouldn't 'a' went, not for kingdoms. But she was on my mind, and Tom was on my mind, so I slept very restless, and twice I went down the right way in the night and slipped around front and see her settin' there by her candle in the window, with her eyes towards the road and the tears in them, and I wished I could do something for her, but I couldn't, only to swear that I wouldn't never do nothing to grieve her any more. And the third time I waked up at dawn and slid down, and she was there yet, and her candle was most out, and her old gray head was resting on her hand, and she was asleep. End of chapter 41. Chapter 42. The old man was uptown again before breakfast, but couldn't get no track of Tom, and both of them sat at the table thinking, and not saying nothing and looking mournful, and their coffee getting cold and not eating anything. And by the old man says, "Did I give you the letter?" "What letter?" "The one I got yesterday out of the post office." "No, you didn't give me no letter." "Well, I must have forgot it." So he rummaged his pockets, and then went off somewheres where he had laid it down, and fetched it and give it to her. She says, "Why, it's from St. Petersburg. It's from Sis." I allowed another walk would do me good, but I couldn't stir. But before she could break it open, she dropped it and run, for she see something, and so do I. It was Tom Sawyer on a mattress, and that old doctor, and Jim, in her calico dress, with his hands tied behind him, and a lot of people. I hid the letter behind the first thing that come handy, and rushed. She flung herself at Tom, crying, and says, "Oh, he's dead, I know he's dead." And Tom, he turned his head a little, and muttered something or other which showed he warn't in his right mind. Then she flung up her hands and says, "He's alive, thank God, and that's enough." And she snatched a kiss of him and flew for the house to get the bed ready, and scattering orders right and left at the niggers and everybody else, as fast as her tongue could go, every jump of the way. I followed the men to see what they was going to do with Jim, and the old doctor and Uncle Silas followed after Tom into the house. The men was very huffy, and some of them wanted to hang Jim for an example to all the other niggers round there, so they wouldn't be trying to run away like Jim done, and making such a raft of trouble, and keeping a whole family scared most to death for days and nights. But the others said don't do it. It wouldn't answer at all. He ain't our nigger, and his owner would turn up and make us pay for him, sure. So that cooled them down a little, because the people that's always the most anxious for to hang a nigger that hain't done just right is always the very ones that hain't the most anxious to pay for him when they've got their satisfaction out of him. They cussed Jim considerable, though, and give him a cuff or two side of the head once in a while. But Jim, he never said nothin', and he never let on to know me, and they took him to the same cabin and put his own clothes on him and chained him again, and not to no bed leg this time, but to a big staple, drove into the bottom log, and chained his hands, too, and both legs, and said he warn't to have nothing but bread and water to eat after this till his owner come, or he was sold at auction, 'cause he didn't come in a certain length of time, and filled up our hole, and said a couple of farmers with guns must stand watch around about the cabin every night, and a bulldog tied to the door in the daytime. And about this time they was through with the job and was tapering off with a kind of a general good-bye cussin'. And then the old doctor comes and takes a look and says, "Don't be no rougher on him than you're obleeged to, because he ain't a bad nigger. When I got to where I found the boy, I see I couldn't cut the bullet out without some help, and he warn't in no condition for me to leave to go and get help, and he got a little worse, and a little worse, and after a long time he went out of his head and wouldn't let me come anigh him any more, and said if I chalked his raft he'd kill me, and no end of wild foolishness like that, and I see I couldn't do anything at all with him, so I says I got to have help somehow, and the minute I says it, out crawls this nigger from somewheres and says he'll help, and he done it too, and done it very well. Of course I judged he must be a runaway nigger, and there I was, and there I had to stick right straight along all the rest of the day and all night. It was a fix, I tell you. I had a couple of patients with the chills, and of course I'd like to run up to town and see them, but I dasn't, because the nigger might get away, and then I'd be to blame, and yet never a skiff come close enough for me to hail. So there I had to stick plumb till daylight this morning, and I never see a nigger that was a better nurse or more faithfuler, and yet he was risking his freedom to do it, and was all tired out, too, and I see plain enough he'd been worked main hard lately. I liked the nigger for that, I tell you, gentlemen. A nigger like that is worth $1,000, and kind treatment, too. I had everything I needed, and the boy was doing as well there as he would have done at home. Better, maybe, because it was so quiet. But there I was, with both of 'em on my hands, and there I had to stick till about dawn this morning. Then some men in a skiff come by, and as good luck would have it, the nigger was settin' by the pallet with his head propped on his knees sound asleep. So I motioned them in quiet, and they slipped up on him and grabbed him and tied him before he knowed what he was about, and we never had no trouble. And the boy, being in a kind of a flighty sleep, too, we muffled the oars and hitched the raft on and towed her over real nice and quiet, and the nigger never made the least row nor said a word from the start. He ain't no bad nigger, gentlemen. That's what I think about him. Somebody says, "Well, it sounds very good, doctor, I'm obleeged to say." Then the other softened up a little, too, and I was mighty thankful to that old doctor for doing Jim that good turn, and I was glad it was according to my judgment of him, too, because I thought he had a good heart in him, and was a good man the first time I see him. Then they all agreed that Jim had acted very well, and was deserving to have some notice took of it and reward, so every one of them promised right out and hearty that they wouldn't cuss him no more. Then they come out and locked him up. I hoped they was going to say he could have one or two of the chains took off, because they was rotten heavy, or could have meat and greens with his bread and water, but they didn't think of it, and I reckoned it warn't best for me to mix in, but I judged I'd get the doctor's yarn to Aunt Sally somehow or other as soon as I'd got through the breakers that was laying just ahead of me. Explanations, I mean, of how I forgot to mention about Sid being shot, when I was telling how him and me put in that dratted night paddling around hunting the runaway nigger. But I had plenty time. Aunt Sally, she stuck to the sick room all day and all night, and every time I see Uncle Silas mooning around I dodged him. Next morning I heard Tom was a good deal better, and they said Aunt Sally was gone to get a nap. So I slips to the sick room, and if I found him awake I reckon we could put up a yarn for the family that would wash. But he was sleepin', and sleepin' very peaceful too, and pale, not fire-faced the way he was when he come. So I set down and laid for him to wake. In about half an hour Aunt Sally comes glidin' in, and there I was, up a stump again. She motioned me to be still, and set down by me, and begun to whisper, and said we could all be joyful now, because all the symptoms was first-rate, and he'd been sleepin' like that for ever so long, and lookin' better and peacefuller all the time, and 10 to 1 he'd wake up in his right mind. So we set there watchin', and by he stirs a bit, and opened his eyes very natural, and takes a look and says, "Hello, why, I'm at home. How's that? Where's the raft?" "It's all right," I says. "And Jim?" "The same," I says, but couldn't say it pretty brash. But he never noticed, but says, "Good, splendid. Now we're all right and safe. Did you tell Auntie?" I was going to say yes, but she chipped in and says, "About what, Sid?" "Why, about the way the whole thing was done." "What whole thing?" "Why, the whole thing. There ain't but one. How we set the runaway nigger free, me and Tom." "Good land! Set the run... What is the child talking about? Dear, dear, out of his head again." "No, I ain't out of my head. I know all what I'm talking about. We did set him free, me and Tom. We laid out to do it, and we done it. And we done it elegant, too. He'd got a start, and she never checked him up. Just set and stared and let him clip along, and I see it warn't no use for me to put in. Why, Auntie, it cost us a power o' work, weeks of it, hours and hours every night whilst you was all asleep, and we had to steal candles and the sheet and the shirt and your dress and spoons and tin plates and case knives and the warming pan and the grindstone and flour and just no end of things. And you can't think what work it was to make the saws and pens and inscriptions and one thing or another, and you can't think half the fun it was. And we had to make up the pictures of coffins and things, and anonymous letters from the robbers, and get up and down the lightning rod and dig the hole into the cabin, and made the rope ladder, and send it in cooked up in a pie, and send in spoons and things to work with in your apron pocket. Mercy sakes! And load up the cabin with rats and snakes and so on for company for Jim. And then you kept Tom here so long with the butter in his hat that you come near spilin' the whole business, because the men come before we was out of the cabin and we had to rush, and they heard us and let drive at us, and I got my share, and we dodged out of the path and let them go by. And when the dogs come they weren't interested in us, but went for the most noise, and we got our canoe and made for the raft, and was all safe, and Jim was a free man, and we done it all by ourselves, and wasn't it bully, Auntie? Well, I never heard the likes of it in all my born days. So it was you little rapscallions, that's been making all this trouble, and turned everybody's wits clean inside out and scared us almost to death. I've as good a notion as ever I had in my life to take it out of you this very minute. To think, here I've been night after night, you just get well once, you young scamp, and I lay all tan the old Harry out of both of ye. But Tom, he was so proud and joyful, he just couldn't hold in, and his tongue just went it, she a-chipping in and spitting fire all along, and both of them going it at once, like a cat convention. And she says, "Well, you get all the enjoyment you can out of it now, for mind, I tell you, if I catch you meddling with him again—" "Meddling with who?" Tom says, dropping his smile and looking surprised. "With who? Why, the runaway nigger, of course. Who'd you reckon?" Tom looks at me very grave and says, "Tom, didn't you just tell me he was all right? Hasn't he got away?" "Him?" says Aunt Sally. "The runaway nigger? 'Deed he hasn't. They've got him back safe and sound, and he's in that cabin again, on bread and water and loaded down with chains till he's claimed or sold." Tom rose square up in bed with his eye hot and his nostrils opening and shutting like gills, and sings out to me, "They ain't no right to shut him up. Shove, and don't you lose a minute. Turn him loose. He ain't no slave. He's free as any creature that walks this earth." "What does the child mean?" I mean every word I say, Aunt Sally, and if somebody don't go, I'll go. I've known him all his life, and so has Tom there. Old Miss Watson died 2 months ago, and she was ashamed she ever was going to sell him down the river, and said so, and she set him free in her will. Then what on earth did you want to set him free for, seeing he was already free? Well, that is a question, I must say, and just like women. Why, I wanted the adventure of it, and I'd have waded neck-deep in blood to— Goodness alive! Aunt Polly! If she weren't standing right there, just inside the door, looking as sweet and contented as an angel half full of pie, I wish I may never. Aunt Sally jumped for her and most hugged the head off of her and cried over her, and I found a good enough place for me under the bed, for it was getting pretty sultry for us, seemed to me. And I peeped out, and in a little while Tom's Aunt Polly shook herself loose and stood there, looking across at Tom over her spectacles, kind of grinding him into the earth, you know. And then she says, "Yes, you better turn your head away. I would if I was you, Tom." "Oh, dearie me," says Aunt Sally. "Is he changed so? Why, that ain't Tom, it's Sid. Tom's, why, where is Tom? He was here a minute ago." "You mean where's Huck Finn, that's what you mean. I reckon I hain't raised such a scamp as my Tom all these years not to know him when I see him. That would be a pretty howdy-do. Come out from under that bed, Huck Finn." So I done it, but not feeling brash. Aunt Sally, she was one of the mixed-uppest-looking persons I ever see, except one, and that was Uncle Silas when he come in and they told it all to him. It kind of made him drunk, as you may say, and he didn't know nothing at all the rest of the day, and preached a prayer-meeting sermon that night that gave him a rattling reputation, because the oldest man in the world couldn't have understood it. So Tom's Aunt Polly, she told all about who I was, and what, and I had to up and tell how I was in such a tight place that when Mrs. Phelps took me for Tom Sawyer, she chipped in and says, "Oh, go on and call me Aunt Sally. I'm used to it now, and 'tain't no need to change." And when Aunt Sally took me for Tom Sawyer, I had to stand it. There weren't no other way, and I knowed he wouldn't mind, because it would be nuts for him, being a mystery, and he'd make an adventure out of him and be perfectly satisfied. And so it turned out, and he let on to be Sid, and made things as soft as he could for me. And his Aunt Polly, she said Tom was right about old Miss Watson setting Jim free in her will. And so, sure enough, Tom Sawyer had gone and took all that trouble and bother to set a free nigger free. And I couldn't ever understand before, until that minute and that talk, how he could help a body set a nigger free with his bringing up. Well, Aunt Polly, she said that when Aunt Sally wrote to her that Tom and Sid had come all right and safe, she says to herself, "Look at that now. I might have expected it, letting him go off that way without anybody to watch him. So now I got to go and traps all the way down the river, 1100 mile, and find out what that creature's up to this time, as long as I couldn't seem to get any answer out of you about it." "Why, I never heard nothing from you," says Aunt Sally. "Well, I wonder. Why, I wrote to you twice to ask you what you could mean by Sid being here." "Well, I never got him, sis." Aunt Polly, she turns around slow and severe and says, "You, Tom." "Well, what?" he says, kind of pettish. "Don't you whop me, you impudent thing. Hand out them letters." "What letters?" "Them letters. I be bound if I have to take hold of you, They're in the trunk, there now, and they're just the same as they was when I got them out of the office. I hain't looked into them, I hain't touched them, but I knowed they'd make trouble, and I thought if you warn't in no hurry, Well, you do need skinning, there ain't no mistake about it, and I wrote another one to tell you I was coming, and I suppose No, it come yesterday. I hain't read it yet, but it's all right, I've got that one. I wanted to offer to bet $2 she hadn't, but I reckon maybe it was just as safe to not to. So I never said nothing. End of chapter 42. Chapter the last. The first time I catched Tom private, I asked him what was his idea, time of the evasion. What it was he'd planned to do if the evasion worked all right and he managed to set a nigger free that was already free before. And he said what he had planned in his head from the start, if we got Jim out all safe, was for us to run him down the river on the raft, and have adventures plumb to the mouth of the river, and then tell him about his being free, and take him back up home on a steamboat in style, and pay him for his lost time, and write word ahead and get out all the niggers around and have them waltz him into town with a torchlit procession and a brass band, and then he would be a hero, and so would we. But I reckoned it was about as well the way it was. We had Jim out of the chains in no time, and when Aunt Polly and Uncle Silas and Aunt Sally found out how good he helped the doctor nurse Tom, they made a heap of fuss over him, and fixed him up prime, and give him all he wanted to eat, and a good time, and nothing to do. And we had him up to the sick room, and had a high talk, and Tom give Jim $40 for being prisoner for us so patient, and doing it up so good. And Jim was pleased most to death, and busted out, and says, "There now, Huck, what'd I tell you? What'd I tell you up there on Jackson Island? I told you I got a hairy breast, and what's the sign in it, and I told you I been rich once, and gwine to be rich again, and it's come true, and here she is. There now, don't talk to me. Signs is signs, mind I tell you, and I know just as well as I's gwine to be rich again as I's a-standing here this minute." And then Tom, he talked along, and says, "Let's all three slide out of here one of these nights and get an outfit and go for howling adventures amongst the Injuns over in the territory for a couple of weeks or two." And I says, "All right, that suits me, but I ain't got no money for to buy the outfit, and I reckon I couldn't get none from home because it's likely Pap's been back before now and got it all away from Judge Thatcher and drunk it up." "No, he hain't," Tom says. "It's all there yet, $6,000 and more, and your Pap hain't ever been back since. Hadn't when I come away, anyhow." Jim says, kind of solemn, "He ain't a-comin' back no mo', Huck." I says, "Why, Jim?" "Never mind why, Huck, but he ain't comin' back no mo'." But I kept at him, so at last he says, "Don't you 'member the house that was floating down the river, and they was a man in there, covered up, and when I went in and uncovered him and didn't let you come in? Well, then you can get your money when you wants it, 'cause that was him." Tom's most well now, and got his bullet around his neck on a watch-guard for a watch, and is always seeing what time it is. And so there ain't nothing more to write about, and I am rotten glad of it, because if I'd knowed what a trouble it was to make a book, I wouldn't have tackled it, and ain't a-going to no more. But I reckon I got to light out for the territory ahead of the rest, because Aunt Sally, she's going to adopt me and civilize me, and I can't stand it. I've been there before. The end. Yours truly, Huck Finn. End of chapter the last, and end of the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain.